play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The blame game begins after an explosion at a hospital in Gaza kills hundreds in what could prove to be a turning point in the war on the terror group Hamas.
Good morning to you. It's just gone 6 o'clock in the UK on Wednesday, the 18th of October. You're tuned into Breakfast with Isabel Webster and Tom Harwood. Here's what's leading the news this morning.
The US president's visit to Jordan with Arab leaders has been cancelled as Biden makes his way to Israel today for an extraordinary wartime visit. The US president is seeking to demonstrate America's support for Israel's mission to eliminate Hamas, while also pressing for ways to ease humanitarian suffering in Gaza.
However, Biden's visit comes as a deadly explosion hits the Al Ali Arab Hospital in Gaza City overnight, reported to have killed 500 people, including many sick women and children. An attack which both Palestinians and Israelis are blaming each other for.
Life on the front line. We have an exclusive interview with a British man who travelled to Israel to fight in the war on Hamas.
I have to say that the people of Be'eri fought very bravely. So a lot of time that we saw also bodies of Israeli innocent citizens in the houses, but also bodies of terrorists that we didn't kill. The people of Be'eri managed to kill some of them.
And back in the UK, we'll have the very latest on tomorrow's upcoming Bedfordshire by-election. That's the seat which, up until recently, was held by Nadine Dorries.
And Alex Deakin has your weather.
Storm Babet is on the way, bringing some torrential rain and some persistent rain as well. And the combination of those likely to cause some problems over the next few days. There's also going to be some strong and gusty winds. There are a number of Met Office warnings in place. Join me later for a full forecast.
And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet us @gbnews.
Well, good morning. Welcome to the programme. It's horrendous news to greet you with today. In Gaza's deadliest day yet of the conflict, hundreds are feared killed in an explosion at the Al Ali Arabi Hospital in Gaza City overnight.
A Gaza Health Ministry spokesperson has said that hundreds died at the building after what Palestinian officials said was an Israeli airstrike. Israel has blamed the blast on a failed rocket launch by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group, which denied responsibility.
Well, initial reports suggest a missile struck outside the building where hundreds of displaced Gazans have been residing after Israel gave the evacuation order for the northern part of the Strip. On Twitter, the Israeli Defence Force posted the following clip.
Now, in it, you can see a rocket launched into the sky from a built-up area. It's then intercepted or indeed explodes in what could be an error.
Well, moments later, you can see a massive explosion a few hundred metres away on the ground. Is this a faulty Hamas rocket or an Israeli missile strike? At the end there, you can see terrorists launch further rockets after that explosion.
Well, the incident came not long after the UN said a school sheltering thousands of people in central Gaza was also hit, killing at least 6 people.
Well, on GB News last night, the Israeli ambassador to the UK, Zipi Hotelveli, spoke to Nigel Farage and had this to say in response to the hospital attack.
I want to check what happened, but I'm sure and I can guarantee you we never target civilians.
Well, world leaders have been quick to express outrage over the event, with protests sweeping nations across the Islamic world, like this scene here in Lebanon.
Well, the hospital explosion comes as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has deepened. The United Nations has warned that Israel's bombing campaign and the blockade of Gaza in response to the Hamas attack on its communities is likely to be in breach of international law.
Israel has blocked supplies of food, water, fuel and electricity since the deadly Hamas terrorist attacks of the 7th of October, but denies there's a humanitarian crisis.
Well, we can speak now to the freelance journalist Jotam Confino, now regular on our programme, joins us this morning from Tel Aviv. Good morning again to you, Jotam. Shocking news to wake up to, the absolute worst, to think of sick, elderly women and children in hospital, place where they were being treated by doctors and nurses. We don't yet know the death toll, but it's thought several hundred dead. And this puts Biden's visit into chaos because now the Palestinians and certainly the Jordanians do not want to speak to him.
Yes, Joe Biden is reportedly furious because he's traveling here in a wartime and he was supposed to meet with Egypt President al-Sisi, Jordan's King Abdullah, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Amman for a summit to discuss many things. First of all, the humanitarian aid coming into Gaza. They were supposed to talk about the hostages kept in Gaza and in general also to send a signal to other actors in the region to stay out of this conflict. But now this is all not happening. He's meeting with the Israelis, of course, and he will be meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Tel Aviv. And of course, he will also be asking questions about this attack that happened at the hospital. Israel has said that it is sharing now intelligence with the United States to prove that it is not behind it, that it is a failed rocket launched by Islamic Jihad, and that Israel has nothing to do with this. So Israel is right now trying to persuade the world, first of all, the world leaders, but also public opinion, which is, of course, much more difficult to persuade when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Absolutely fascinating to see the blame game here and the developments, at least last night when the first news of this hospital hit was released, and then the videos that we started to see. It does seem that there has been a slight shift in narrative. At first, many people expecting that this was an Israeli hit on this hospital, and now many more people saying that this could have been a backfired Hamas attack. Where does public opinion really sit on this? And frankly, how long will it be until we know the truth?
First of all, the truth always dies in war. Isn't that the saying? It's horrendous, and especially in the time of social media. It took minutes before, first of all media, but also just people who in general follow the conflict, people with millions of followers, were immediately ready to accept what came from Hamas, the explanation that came from Hamas. Some of them then later also explained that Israel has something to say, they had evidence, but many don't. which means that, first of all, in the Middle East, those who are already siding with the Palestinians, which is most of the people in the Middle East, and those who side with Hamas, they don't care what Israel says. It doesn't matter how much proof you provide. We saw this last week when Israel was trying to show the world that Hamas had, and I excuse the language, but slit the throats of babies, burned families alive. People are still not accepting this. They don't care about the eyewitnesses. They don't care about the photo material. So this is a massive PR war. What Israel has, however, is most of the leaders in the Western world who are standing by Israel right now and who are, of course, willing to see the documentation. If they have proof, which they say they do, they have released some videos. If the world leaders cannot verify this, then at least they'll still have the support of the leaders. I'm not so sure people on the street will feel the same. We see how absolutely toxic the debate is right now, and people do not care about the facts. They care about what they think and what they believe, and so be it if other people can prove you wrong.
Yeah, Jotam Comfy, for your analysis this morning in Tel Aviv. We thank you, and we'll be back with you, I'm sure, at a later date. Thanks very much for now. But with tensions running so high, the United States President Joe Biden is expected to arrive whilst we're on air in Israel as part of a diplomatic mission amid these growing concerns over the escalating conflict. He's expected to spend the day in Tel Aviv for talks with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss the impending invasion of Gaza, to help in the safe release of hostages held by Hamas, and also to address the growing humanitarian crisis in the Middle East.
Now, President Biden was then expected to travel on to Jordan for talks about accelerating humanitarian assistance to Gaza. However, this stop has now been cancelled after the strike on that hospital in Gaza, which Palestinian officials are, of course, blaming on Israel, but Israel is blaming on the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group.
Well, as President Biden left Washington, D.C. last night, his White House spokesperson, John Kirby, told what gathered reporters that he will pose tough questions in those meetings with Israeli leaders.
Now, Biden has previously said that the United States did not want conflict between Israel and Hamas to grow into a wider war, with the focus now on making sure that humanitarian aid begins to flow into Gaza, despite an Israeli siege that has blocked food, fuel and water supplies.
Well, joining us now from Nashville, Tennessee, is the former advisor to the Clinton and the Bush administrations and regular on the programme as well, Steve Gill. Good morning to you. This is a diplomatic nightmare that the president is going to be landing into. To have his trip cancelled isn't just a snub, it's a very clear message. They're extremely unhappy and outraged with what has happened, or they believe to have happened, at this hospital in Gaza.
Yeah, it was a train wreck before he even left the U.S. He tried to do a 60 Minutes interview to show strength and vigor, but he came off weak, indecisive, and inconsistent. So after that failed debacle to gain political advantage over this crisis in the Middle East, he then decides to go try to get a photo op in Israel at a time of war when they're preparing for an invasion, when it is a war zone, putting himself at risk simply for a photo op. I don't think Joe Biden saw that he could do anything to help Israel in this trip or try to help with these other foreign leaders. I think this was all about a photo op for him, and it is, again, started off like a train wreck.
Now, there are reports this morning that this trip by Biden was conditional on some concessions, perhaps, from the Israeli government. Humanitarian aid corridors being established, safe areas for civilians in Gaza being established, and perhaps even a delay to this expected ground invasion, at least while Biden is there. To that extent, does this visit matter in terms of setting some ground rules for this conflict?
I lost the audio in there, so I'm not sure exactly what the question was, but I think that when you have these meetings being canceled, it takes away the whole purpose of going there. And again, he's put himself at risk at a time that, kind of the world needs American leadership. And these meetings not taking place takes away any opportunity to try and calm the situation. As you all have reported, this horrific bombing or missile strike at this hospital is inflaming the other countries. It is certainly what the Hamas propagandists want, and some of the media have run with the story before they had the facts. It's not going to help the situation, and I'm not sure that Joe Biden can repair it.
Do you think that there are going to be questions about whether perhaps America, indeed the West, have taken their eye off the ball when it comes to the Middle East? Perhaps we've been understandably preoccupied with what's been happening with Russia and Ukraine, but perhaps also in the China Pacific with Taiwan. You know, have we absolutely missed seeing this coming, this inflammation of the escalation here?
Again, I've lost the audio, but...
Oh, dear. A few problems with our line there to Tennessee, but you get the impression there that there are grave questions, not only for the West, but about what on earth will happen during this visit by President Biden. He is due to arrive whilst we are on air in the next few hours in Tel Aviv, and we will be broadcasting that live here on GB News.
Now, there may not have been a full-scale invasion of Gaza yet, but of course fighting does continue on the ground, with Hamas in the south and Hezbollah in the north, on the border with Lebanon.
Hundreds of wounded Israeli soldiers are returning from the front lines for treatment, and among them a British-Israeli one of an estimated 200 who left the UK and headed to the region to sign up to fight.
Well, our reporter on the ground, Charlie Peters, has spoken to him about his experiences on the front line. For security reasons, we've decided to keep his identity secret.
At 7 a.m. they woke us up, told us that Israel is in a total war, and we need to get ready and that we are going down to the Gaza Strip.
Had you heard any reports about the extent of the Hamas violence in that kibbutz?
We didn't have reports. On our way, we opened phones to understand what's happening, because the IDF couldn't understand what's happening because there was too much information going from everywhere. We saw the live streams of Hamas, and then we understand that something really strange is happening.
And when you got to the kibbutz building, that's when you engaged with the Hamas fighters there?
Yeah, before we saw a lot of stuff that Hamas terrorists did, a lot of bodies of innocent citizens. And when we came to Kibbutz Be'eri, it was a junction of Be'eri by the gate of the kibbutz. So we heard already all of the shooting, and we understand that the massacre is still happening. I have to say that the people of Be'eri fought very bravely. There were a lot of time that we saw also bodies of Israeli innocent citizens in the houses, but also bodies of terrorists that we didn't kill. The people of Be'eri managed to kill some of them.
What was the fighting like? Very close combat, very close quarters?
Yeah, very close combats. Most of our combats are 5 to 7 meters from each other, or that they were inside the houses, and we tried to break inside the houses. In every house, there were between 3 or 4 terrorists that stayed inside the houses. I saw 3 terrorists. I yelled to them, IDF, IDF, because we didn't understand if they were terrorists or citizens, people that have weapons.
When did you suffer your injury? What happened?
I suffered it on Sunday evening. We did our last...
the last fight?
The last fight with terrorists, bad luck. A machine gun started to shoot on us from inside the house.
A machine gun shot at you from inside where you were? So you ran into a house and there was a terrorist inside there?
4 terrorists.
4?
We tried to shoot on the terrorists, they shot us back. My soldier that operates the machine gun fell down and dead in the place. I got injured in my stomach and in my hand. So I was out on my back because I was bleeding from the bat, from the
bullet in your stomach. Yeah.
Exactly, that I was not going to bleed. And I started shooting on the terrorist. I shot 90, 100 bullets on them. One of my soldiers put a grenade, he couldn't put it inside the hallway, so it came to the living room where I was. It closed. I have no idea why. As a religious man, I'm saying it's because God, but I didn't get injured from the grenade. So another officer of my unit managed to break inside the house from the kitchen window. He took me outside, then the tank came and finished the job.
Destroyed the house? The tank destroyed the house after you all pulled out?
On the terrorist. And we could gladly say that the kibbutz Be'eri has 0 terrorists inside of them. I have to say that I was really impressed from the brave of the citizens of Be'eri.
Right now, Israel is preparing for that likely invasion of the Gaza Strip. Do you think the country and the army is ready for the next phase of this war?
Of course.
You're ready to go again?
I will go again next week after I will heal.
Well, thank you to Charlie for that exclusive interview there. And of course, we'll be speaking to Charlie Peters live from Israel later in the programme.
Now, as the war in Israel continues, how are Muslim and Jewish communities being impacted here in the UK?
Well, yesterday we saw the extraordinary images of British faith leaders meeting at Lambeth Palace in London, where they delivered a joint statement of solidarity, urging communities to stand together against hatred.
Well, our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has visited one of Manchester's most diverse areas to find out.
A rich tapestry of culture. Manchester is one of the UK's most diverse cities. Just a couple of miles outside the city centre lies Cheetham Hill, a neighbourhood home to large populations of both Muslims and Jews. Zahur Ahmed is the leader of one of the mosques in the area. I asked him about the multiculturalism of Manchester and if he feels the war in Israel is having an impact on the relationship between Jews and Muslims here in the city.
Yeah, so he's saying that obviously what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, it's not affected a lot of the community here, but people are a bit upset. But there isn't much of a tension or anything in this area. You know, Manchester is a good example of how both the communities live together and have lived together for a long time in good faith.
GBNews also reached out to many of the synagogues in the area, but sadly none of them felt comfortable speaking out given the current concerns about anti-Semitism. Now, as tensions between Israel and Hamas intensify, Manchester's Muslim-Jewish Forum is urging people in the city to keep the peace.
Manchester is a wonderful city, and there's no reason why people should fight. The great danger comes when you try to import into this country tensions that actually originate from overseas. It's completely wrong, completely counterproductive. We should not allow our feelings about what's happening over there to poison community relations here in Manchester.
For now, communities of Muslims and Jewish people continue to live here side by side, just as they always have. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
OK, time now to see what the weather's getting up to. Here's Alex Deakin from the Met Office with your update.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Good morning. Storm Babet is moving in through the rest of today, bringing some very heavy rain, particularly tomorrow across eastern parts of Scotland. But even today, we could see some issues, heavy showers developing across parts of the Midlands and southern England, turning very wet here through this afternoon and the evening. The wind strengthening as well. For large parts of the UK, it is another dry day. Much of eastern England and a good part of Scotland turning dry once the early rain clears from the west. Temperatures will be again into the teens, feeling a bit cooler because of the winds, especially across the south as the rain peps up here, but also going to see some heavy rain through the evening time across Northern Ireland. Met Office warning in place for that, and then this band of rain becomes slow moving over parts of northern England before working into southern Scotland through the night. So again, slow moving nature, persistent heavy rain could cause some problems. Temperatures holding up overnight, so it won't be a cold night at all, but the rain could continue through Thursday across these eastern parts of Scotland. That's where we have a Met Office amber warning in place. The winds also likely to be an issue, particularly across parts of Scotland, especially to the far northwest. Some very strong gusts here. So, as I say, we have a number of Met Office warnings in place. Check out the website for more details on that. Further south tomorrow, there will again be some heavy showers. Some brighter spells in between. Temperatures, again, mid to even high teens, but feeling cooler where it's wet and very windy.
Well, still to come, we'll have the very latest in sport with Paul Coit. Plus, we'll continue to bring you the very latest on the Israel-Hamas conflict. That's coming up next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamonn.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning to you. It is 6:23. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Tom.
Well, let's have a look at some of the other stories coming into the newsroom this morning.
Wales's First Minister Mark Drakeford has announced cuts to some public services in the middle of the financial year. Some Welsh government-funded services, including free school meals and childcare, will see their budget cut, while the NHS and Transport for Wales will receive extra money to keep things going. The Welsh Conservatives have accused the Labour administration of extremely poor management.
And Greta Thunberg was arrested while linking arms and chanting with other activists outside a hotel in Mayfair yesterday. The Swedish environmentalist was taken to Wandsworth Police Station during a demonstration against a meeting of oil executives. Met Police say they have arrested the activists after they refused to move.
Humza Yousaf has pledged to freeze council tax across Scotland for the next year. The First Minister also announced ambitious plans to issue bonds to help fund vital projects. The SNP government will also spend an additional £300 million on tackling NHS waiting lists in the next 3 years.
French President Emmanuel Macron said that the return of Islamist terrorism poses a threat to all European nations. His comments come a day after 2 Swedish football fans were shot dead at a terrorist attack in Brussels before Belgium's Euro 2024 qualifier against Sweden. Belgian police say the suspect, who identified himself online as a member of Islamic State, has been killed.
Right, time for some light relief, and to get away from all the news, here's Paul Coit with the sport.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Not only am I head of sport on the show, and pastimes, by the way, sports and pastimes, I also am head of fashion as well.
Yeah.
You were aware of that.
I was.
And I was concerned with Tom here because there's been a complaint, Tom. Is this correct?
There has. Mike, I'm told, has written in to the programme to say, love Tom Harwood. Well, thank you, Mike.
I like the way you did that very quickly at the top there.
But not sure about the pink shirt and the green tie. Mike is not a fan of the get-up.
Well, as head of fashion, Mike's wrong. Sorry, Mike, but there you go. And I think it's great.
Pink and green should always be seen.
So I think so. And the last time I interviewed the Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago, I was wearing exactly this tie and shirt combo. And as we were waiting for the camera to get set up, he complimented the tie.
Wow.
And I was like, it's
Hold on,
House of
was
Commons
that one of these
green.
people that handed him the script that said, what a lovely tie, and then smiled, and then...
Oh, now you're making me question my very validity. This is...
I think it looks terrific, so I just thought I'd say that.
Well,
now,
thank you.
England beat Italy yesterday 3-1 to qualify for the Euros.
Super.
When do you think the last time England beat Italy in England was? So they've played a few times. So last time that England actually managed to beat Italy in England, Tom, was when? How long ago?
I very much remember England being defeated by Italy in an outrageous display in the last Euros.
That's correct. Yeah, that went to the final when we lost on penalties, of course.
How long ago was it?
I'm not even going to continue until you offer me a year.
I'm going to say. The thing is, if I say a year, I'm going to get it completely wrong in terms of whether or not there was a Euro.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay.
Okay.
This is not a question of sport.
I'm going to say 2016.
2016. Now, I asked Isabel this, and she was 1 year out. The actual answer is 1977.
Wow.
Can you believe that? Trevor Brooking and Kevin Keegan scored goals. 1977, that was the last time that England actually managed to beat Italy at home. Now, Harry Kane, again, 2 goals. He's now breaking records as well. He scored more goals for England now at home than any other player. Jude Bellingham, who is, I think the kid is 20 years old. I mean, and Jude Bellingham, I think we can see him there on the right wearing number 10. And he is just unbelievable. He's playing for Real Madrid, playing for England as well. And at the age of 20, you know, the Wunderkind label, there he is, and he 60 touches, everything was perfect, and he's probably the best young player, you know, you could say we've ever had. And I honestly do think that England will win the Euros next year.
Ooh.
I'm going to be that bold.
We've been saying this for the last couple of Euros.
Yeah, well, we've been saying it for the last 50 or so, but this time I really do think it's going to be good. A couple of other results. Now, Northern Ireland lost to Slovenia. Scotland lost 4-1 to France. They're not bothered. They've already qualified. It was a friendly. But San Marino. Now, San Marino, not really terribly good. One of the smallest countries. In fact, this studio is larger than San Marino is. They lost 2-1 to Denmark, but the most important thing for San Marino is that they scored their first goal in 2 years. So well done to San Marino. They've lost 83 out of their 84 Euro qualifiers over the years, but they did score a goal.
Question for you.
Yes.
Why is he the Wunderkid if he's playing for Real Madrid in England? What is it in Spanish?
It is the Wunderkid. See, I can do that because he used to play at Dortmund.
Oh,
so
OK. I wondered where there had to be a German...
Is it Wunderkid or Wunderkind? I think it's
I
the
don't know,
the
but
kind.
I know that in Spanish
Yes.
it is, drumroll please,
Yes.
Niño Maravilla.
That's
Although that sounded
exactly...
kind of Italian.
And of course, you didn't search that on the internet
not
at all.
I just knew that.
Perfect knowledge.
No, it's unbelievable. Not only did you know the last time Italy played, honestly.
I should just be a sports anchor.
I do want to mention the Cricket World Cup as well, now, because there's been another surprise in that. Now, England lost to Afghanistan the other day, which was a huge shock. But there's an even bigger shock yesterday, which suits us better, and that's the fact that South Africa lost to the Netherlands. Now, the Netherlands, you associate with football, you associate with ice skating, you associate with dike jumping, but when it comes to cricket, it's not anything they're any good at. And the fact that the Netherlands have managed to beat South Africa, not only great and exciting, underdog winning, but also the fact that England, not only playing South Africa in the Rugby World Cup on Saturday, playing South Africa. What are the chances of that in the cricket world
Springbok
as well?
Off.
So what does this mean Springbok off? That's exactly, and I hope they do as well.
What does this mean for England's hopes in the Cricket World Cup, then?
It's better because the thing is, it's a round-robin tournament. So you've got 10 teams. Everybody has to play each other once, but only the top 4 will then qualify for the semi-finals. Now, we are the current holders, and we're expected to do really well, but it hasn't been good. But Ben Stokes is going to come back. He's given a stirring speech. They're calling him, what is it? The spiritual leader, Matthew Mott, the coach has called him. So he's not the captain, but he's given the speeches, and hopefully he's going to be back. So not only is it going to be good for the cricket, but also it will probably inspire the team as well, because they're not playing as well as they should be. But
there we go.
I still have hope.
OK.
2-0 against England, South Africa, rugby and the cricket.
And we're going to win the Euros next year.
And we're
Hear it all here.
You know what? Am I drunk or overly positive? I'm a bit worried about myself.
I'm here for it. We need
what
some
I'm here for.
positivity today. Paul, we love it. Thanks very much indeed. Might even call him the Niño Maravilla.
Is that me?
Yes.
No.
No? OK. Too much.
Well, still to come, our headline makers David Mellor and Emma Burnell will be in the studio to go through the very latest front pages. That's coming up next.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels
we're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 6:33. Time to take a look at your morning newspapers, and a lot of the front pages featuring that attack at a hospital in Gaza City overnight. Officials there are saying at least 500 were killed. We haven't been able to confirm those numbers. Israel is blaming Hamas for the misfiring rocket, as they put it.
Well, the Eye also leads with this story, adding that many who were killed in the attack were children and civilians seeking shelter in the hospital.
Elsewhere, here's the Financial Times front page featuring a picture of President Xi and Putin meeting during the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing yesterday.
Whereas the Daily Telegraph has warned that we're facing terror threats from Iran. That's according to the head of MI5, Ken McCallum. He said that the country has already posted a particularly intensive threat and may now move into new directions.
The Daily Star warns Britain's facing an invasion of furry, clawed Chinese crabs, which are marching sideways across the country, eating everything in their path. You can always rely on the Daily Star for some light relief. Or maybe it isn't light relief, I'm not sure.
Well, I think we need a bit of light relief today.
Lovely.
But let's go through some of these headlines now with the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Mellor, and the political consultant, Emma Burnell. David, shall we start with you? What else can we start with? But, of course, this front page news that is leading so many of the papers this morning, the dreadful attack on the hospital.
Yes, Guardian says hundreds feared dead in Gaza hospital strike. The Times says outrage at hospital attacks. And the Daily Telegraph says Biden visits Israel as hundreds die in Gaza hospital. Of course, I had the privilege, if that's what you can call it, of going as a Foreign Office Minister to Gaza. It's terrible. Mm-hmm. And I had a meeting with Mr. Shamir, who was then the Prime Minister of Israel, and I said, Mr. Shamir, I'm a 30-odd-year-old, this was some time ago, 30-odd-year-old British father of 2 children. If I was an Israeli 30-odd-year-old father of 2 children, what hope do you offer me that I will ever be able to bring my family up in peace? That was 35 years ago, and the answer is no hope at all. And the other irony, I was in the cabinet room when 2 IRA mortar bombs went off in the garden, and one of them fortunately didn't explode as well as it should, so we lived to tell the tale. But since then we've kissed and made up with the IRA, not without controversy, and Ireland is at peace. When is someone going to have the statesmanship to try and do that in Israel? And it's very impossible. I had my first speech live by Benjamin Netanyahu 30-odd years ago when I had my one afternoon of glory chairing the Security Council of the United Nations. He came in and delivered himself a terrible speech. And I said to our ambassador, what the hell is this fellow up to? I'd never heard of him before. He said, oh, he's just addressing the New York television shows. He's not really interested in any of you. You're just incidental. You know, the fact you're the Security Council doesn't matter to him. When is Netanyahu going to make way? When is Israel going to find a leader who is capable of actually injecting some fresh impetus into peace? How long can they go on like this?
Well, and yet, Emma Burnell, it takes two sides to reach peace. And whilst in the past, particularly in the 1990s, the Israelis were happy to sign up to a two-state solution. There was the famous Camp David retreat, and the Palestinians rejected that.
Well, no, we actually got very, very close in the 90s, and then the leader of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, was actually shot by an Israeli extremist, and that's when that started to fall apart. So there was a moment when Yasser Arafat and the Israelis were actually negotiating properly, and it fell apart on the Israeli side because after the death of Rabin, the politics then went much more extreme in Israel. Look, both sides are very intransigent at the moment and getting more so. What Hamas did at the weekend before last was horrific, and you can absolutely understand the sentiment in Israel about sort of making sure that something like that can never, ever happen again. The problem is that then you've also got similar sentiment in Gaza when they're seeing hospitals being blown up. Now, both sides are claiming that it was the other side that did that, but whether or not that particular incident was done by a stray Hamas rocket or an Israeli attack, there have been over 2,000 deaths in Gaza in the last week. And we know that there are people suffering without water, without food. And those are not the people who are Hamas fighters. Those are just the ordinary citizens who have been blockaded into Gaza. They can't get out. And it's just so difficult because both sides are feeling righteously angry. But that's not a position from which anyone actually manages to find peace. And as David said, and obviously David has far more experience and statesmanship and international experience than I do, but as he said, it's going to take somebody to take the brave stance for peace rather than simply generating more conflict to actually solve this and make lives better, both for ordinary Palestinians and ordinary Israelis.
And lots of talk about somebody. You know, obviously President Biden, as we speak, on his way into the region. Things changed dramatically since
as long as he knows where he is and where he's
exactly. You know, is that person President Biden? What happens now, given that the Jordanians have pulled up the drawbridge and said we won't meet with you now in light of what has happened? And, you know, where does this leave? I think peace isn't even on the table, is it? At the moment, the best we can hope for is a ceasefire or at least some humanitarian aid.
You know, I have no time, obviously, for Hamas. And there they are, skulking in Qatar, all the Hamas leadership, safe from any possibility of being bombed. And they behave disgustingly. But, you know, when I went to Gaza and on other trips I've done to the region, the people I feel sorry for are the 2 million Palestinians who have no choice but to live where they live.
Absolutely.
And these poor little children. Heartrending.
No, I actually had difficult questions from my 8-year-old now last night saying to me, Mummy, why are children being bombed? They haven't got anything to do with it. I didn't have an answer. Didn't know how to explain that to a child. And it's very simple when you see things through the eyes of a children, right and wrong. How on earth we as adults make sure that the right thing is done, incredibly hard to see.
But of course what the Israelis would say there is that the Hamas terrorists are firing rockets from schools, from hospitals, from civilian areas and using these individuals as human shields.
I don't care what they say. You can't bomb a hospital.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Israelis deny that they did, and we should be clear to say that. Well, of course they did.
They would, wouldn't they?
Well, they said that they will be able to prove this and provide the proof, so all eyes of the international community will very much be on that, and it is so important to establish the facts, because it really feels like this conflict is on a knife edge. President Biden will be arriving in the region, we think, in the next hour and a half or so, and we're expecting probably big developments whilst we're on air. That's the live picture from Sderot in Israel this morning. We have been seeing smoke rising, but not as we watch that shot at the minute, but as you can imagine, constantly changing picture coming from there. Emma, should we take a look at some of the other stories this morning? The MI5 warning of the UK terror threat from Iran. I mean, it all links in, doesn't it? This is the front of the Telegraph.
Well, this is it. I mean, we mentioned that Hamas are quite possibly in Qatar. Now, let's think about that. Let's think about what happened in Qatar last summer when we absolutely sport-washed that country. And we allowed them to become these international celebratory partners of football. And I really think that we have all taken our eyes off the ball when it comes to these regimes, and that includes Iran. Now, I was at a conference about this time last year, listening to Iranian women talking about the murders that had happened there, and the protests that had happened simply for trying to live their lives. And this is something that Iran has their fingers in a lot of these pies, and we have taken their eye off the ball when it comes to the behaviour of that state, both internally and externally. And we need to be a lot more, I mean, I just think, since the disaster that was the Iraq War, we, as the West, have kind of gone, well, it's not our problem anymore, we're just withdrawing from everything, we're becoming more insular. And this story shows that actually, when we become more insular, they don't listening to us saying we're not interested, they will come to our shores and do it here. So I think it's really, really important that we focus much more on international diplomacy, on international understanding and development, because if we don't, the bad actors will.
It was fascinating to read the head of MI5, who was speaking alongside the heads of the intelligence services in the US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, the so-called Five Eyes network of intelligence sharing, that this could really pose grave risks here in the United Kingdom. David Mellor, what can the UK do to better protect itself?
Well, I think it would be, obviously, we have to ensure that our security apparatus gets the resources it needs to be able to trace and track down these plots before they have a chance to do something terrible. I think it's inevitable that there will be something awful happening, and there's no doubt about that. But you see, the problem we have at the moment is that the whole international structure that's supposed to deal with these things, the UN Security Council and so on, it's utterly paralysed. What's Russia doing still on the UN Security Council? There's a meeting between Putin and Xi. Neither of them have clean hands when it comes to peace and preventing militarism and terrorism taking control. It's hard not to feel quite depressed about the whole thing.
No, I agree. And Emma, you mentioned Iraq there, and I just want to bring our viewers up to date on breaking news overnight. This was at 5:42, two American officials telling the Reuters news agency that US military had managed to thwart attacks targeting US troops in Iraq. So we are already seeing existing tensions flaring up in places where we've been through so many traumas before. I want to move on, David, while continuing the discussion of the role of China and Russia in the United Nations. The FT have them at this conference that's ongoing at the moment. They met yesterday, handshakes, and they're featured on the front page for the FT. Tell us more.
Yes, and also on inside pages in the other broadsheets. I mean, the situation is that Russia is plainly in a bind and needs China. The unresolved issue in my mind, and I think in lots of other people's minds, is do China need Russia? And what do they need Russia for? Do they become the leaders, if you like, of the opposition in the world when, you have America trying to rule the roost? And I think the great difficulty I have is knowing what manner of man is President Xi. Is he a man of peace or is he a man of war? I think it's hard to see him as anything other than somebody who believes that China has a path to domination, and that path to domination doesn't lead us through the groves of peace, sadly.
Now, as we've been talking, we've been seeing live explosions in Israel. And I just wonder, given the context of war on the continent of Europe, war in the Middle East, with this meeting between Xi and Putin, what can we expect about war in the South China Sea? What can we expect about the future of Taiwan? Are we entering now an era of greater global conflict?
Absolutely, and I think the Chinese have been militarizing these various islands in the South China Sea, through which a very substantial chunk of the world's trade passes. I would have thought, I don't understand why Xi thinks it's necessary, for instance, to threaten Taiwan. Xi has got it all on a plate. The only way he can throw away China's inevitable continuing growth as the major trading country, global trading country in the world, is by provoking some kind of violence. And it looks like he wants to do that. I think these are uncertain times. I forget who it was now, some historian who, when there was the collapse of the Soviet Empire, said this is the end of history.
Francis Fukuyama.
Yes. I wonder what he's thinking now. I just want to test you guys. I once heard him talk live, and it seemed to me a rather glib analysis. But the reality is history is not ending, it's different. And the other thing is, when I was a Foreign Office Minister, it was the era of the Russians, the Soviets, a lot of old men who were not particularly nice old men and were sometimes threatening old men, but they didn't really pose anything like the threat that we've got at the moment, where, I mean, anything could happen anywhere at any time. And then you look at international leadership. I mean, we don't contribute a lot. We have, I mean, you can't help being young and inexperienced, but I don't know that our Prime Minister is much of a help.
Well, he's due to fly into Israel tomorrow, isn't he? And who knows what role he'll have in any of that. Can we move on before we wrap this and talk about some sort of domestic stories? And Emma, this is on the front of the Times. The NHS is being urged to offer menopause checks for the over 40. Seems quite young.
Oh, no, it's not.
Is it not?
No, it's not. I'm 48 and I've been perimenopausal for a good 4 years at least. And it's a nightmare. And it is crazy, absolutely crazy, that the NHS, when we're talking about your MOT, your over 40 MOT, doesn't factor into the fact that 50% of the population are likely to be approaching this, if not going through it. You know, there was a wonderful book written by Caroline Criado Perez, which shows how so much of the systems that we have are entirely based on the male body rather than the female body. And this is just a classic example of that. You know, obviously you shouldn't be asking blokes if they're going through the menopause, although I know there's currently a slightly bizarre conversation about the menopause, but that's a whole different thing. But your body between 40 and 50 as a woman changes dramatically. It sent me absolutely flipping loopy, I'm not going to kid. And there are really important things that you need to be able to do to counter it. And the fact that we're not looking at it is terrible. Excuse me.
I suppose, David Mellor, there is an opportunity here perhaps to even save taxpayer money if this is a preventative measure that the NHS could take?
Well, obviously, because, you know, when I was Health Minister, what we were trying to do was it should be a national health service, whereas for the most part it's a national sickness service. And what you need to try to do is to help people deal with things that are not immediately life-threatening, but which are deeply distressing. Look, I hope to avoid the menopause, if such a thing exists. And I have no experience of the menopause. But, I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's a sad part of women's lives, that years can be lost in the battle with this changing of life. And you have to ask yourself, is the NHS doing as much as it should do? And I think the answer inevitably is no.
And most women in the workplace now, which wasn't the case at least 1 or 2 generations ago. So, you know, this helps women to stay in the workplace for longer. It has to be a good thing. And we say thank you very much to David Mellor and Emma Burnell. More from both of them a little bit later on. But with the time at 6:51, we're going to take a little look at the headlines this hour.
The US President Joe Biden's visit to Jordan with Arab leaders has been cancelled as he makes his way to Tel Aviv today for an extraordinary wartime visit.
However, Biden's visit comes as a deadly explosion hits the Al Ali Arab Hospital in Gaza City overnight. It's reported to have killed 500 people, including many sick women and children.
And at 7 a.m. in just a few minutes' time, the Office for National Statistics will release the latest inflation figures, which are expected to have decreased from the August figure of 6.3%.
Now, the Met Office has issued an amber weather warning for parts of the UK as Storm Babet is set to bring downpours and strong winds from today.
Well, the senior meteorologist for the British Weather Services, Jim Dale, joins us now. And Jim, how concerned should we be?
With any warnings, there should also be an element of concern. These warnings are not given out lightly. And one of those warnings is an amber warning, which is for the Grampian area, Angus, maybe into the Lothian area of Scotland. So the main warning is about rain rather than wind. I'm not suggesting that the winds are going to be particularly pretty for the next few days. They're not. We're going to see 30, 40 mile an hour gusts fairly universally, to be honest with you. So wet and windy, miserable, I think is a good terminology for what we're going to see in this next 72 hours. Going nowhere fast. Babet at the moment is well to the south coast, so it's going to cross northern France. But as I suggest to you, it's pushing frontal systems and troughs northwards towards the UK and through the UK over these next 72 hours. So one after another. So there will be dry gaps, but then you go back into it, and it's that incessant sort of accumulation of rain that's going to cause the problem. When I say incessant, by the time we get to Thursday, Friday time, that part of Scotland that I talked about, the southeast corner particularly, and maybe even into northeast England, we're talking 100 millimetre plus. So 4 inches of rain, which is equivalent to well over a month's worth of rain. So localised flooding, regionalised flooding, that's why the warnings are out there.
You talk about it being over northern France at the moment. When do we expect it to reach our shores? I was hearing that it's going to arrive and pretty much be here until Saturday, so several days of this.
Yeah, it's Isabel. It's a slow fuse. This one. It's the actual centre of the low. Babet itself won't actually come into the UK. It'll skim to the south. It's its frontal systems that it's carrying, and Babet was actually born over the Canary Islands. Very, very warm waters. Record temperatures a few weeks ago in the Canary Islands. So all of this has got intensity wrapped in it, energy, if you like. So this is why, as it's moved its way across the Bay of Biscay and now moving towards ourselves, that it's going to produce this intense rainfall, that and the winds that go with it. So as I say, miserable for many and hazardous for some. And that's what we've got to expect now for the next 72 hours.
And do we have any indication of where in the United Kingdom it will be most hazardous, where people really do need to watch out?
Yeah, well, it's starting, Tom. It's starting now on the south coast and on the west coast of Scotland and running to Northern Ireland. So, look, to be honest with you, I use the word a mess because it's not exactly an exact science in terms of who gets what, where, and when. Best to basically say everybody's in it. Now, even the areas that are not in the worst of it, they're going to see 30, 40 millimetres quite comfortably. So, driving's not going to be particularly easy with rain accumulating on the roads. Type of thing.
We've got to say thank you very much for that and leave it there. And we'll take a little look at our forecast now as well.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Good morning. Storm Babet is moving in through the rest of today, bringing some very heavy rain, particularly tomorrow across eastern parts of Scotland. But even today, we could see some issues, heavy showers developing across parts of the Midlands and southern England, turning very wet here through this afternoon and the evening. The wind strengthening as well. For large parts of the UK, it is another dry day. Much of eastern England and a good part of Scotland turning dry once the early rain clears from the west. Temperatures will be again into the teens, feeling a bit cooler because of the winds, especially across the south as the rain peps up here, but also going to see some heavy rain through the evening time across Northern Ireland. Met Office warning in place for that, and then this band of rain becomes slow moving over parts of northern England before working into southern Scotland through the night. So again, that slow moving nature, persistent heavy rain could cause some problems. Temperatures holding up overnight, so it won't be a cold night at all, but the rain could continue through Thursday across these eastern parts of Scotland. That's where we have a Met Office amber warning in place. The wind's also likely to be an issue, particularly across parts of Scotland, especially to the far northwest. Some very strong gusts here. So, as I say, we have a number of Met Office warnings in place. Check out the website for more details on that. Further south tomorrow, there will again be some heavy showers. Some brighter spells in between. Temperatures, again, mid to even high teens, but feeling cooler where it's wet and very windy.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
The blame game begins after an explosion at a hospital in Gaza, killing hundreds. As we await the arrival of the US President Joe Biden into Israel, a White House spokesperson has said the president will put tough questions to Israel during his visit.
Well, good morning. It's 7 o'clock in the UK on Wednesday, the 18th of October. This is Breakfast with Isabel, Webster and me, Tom Harwood. Here's what's leading the news this morning.
President Biden's visit to Jordan with Arab leaders has been cancelled as he makes his way to the Middle East today for an extraordinary wartime visit. He's seeking to demonstrate America's support for Israel's mission to eliminate Hamas, while also pressing for ways to ease the humanitarian suffering in Gaza.
However, Biden's visit comes as a deadly explosion hits the Al Ahi Arab Hospital in Gaza City overnight, reported to have killed some 500 people, including many sick women and children. Our reporter Charlie Peters will bring us the very latest from Tel Aviv.
Confusion and horror has swept the region after the unexplained and appalling attack on a hospital last night. This as Biden arrives to meet with world leaders.
Life on the Frontline, we have an exclusive interview with a British man who travelled to Israel to fight in the war on Hamas.
I have to say that the people of Be'eri fought very bravely. There were a lot of time that we saw also bodies of Israeli innocent citizens in the houses, but also bodies of terrorists that we didn't kill. The people of Be'eri managed to kill some of them.
And back in the UK, we'll bring you the very latest on tomorrow's upcoming mid-Bedfordshire by-election, the seat which up until recently was held by Nadine Dorries.
And our economics and business editor Liam Halligan's here to bring us live reaction to inflation figures this hour.
Is the cost of living squeeze easing? We'll know as soon as this September inflation number comes out. I'll be bringing you the latest on the money as ever.
And Alex Deakin has your weather.
Storm Babet is on the way, bringing some torrential rain and some persistent rain as well. And the combination of those likely to cause some problems over the next few days. There's also going to be some strong and gusty winds. There are a number of Met Office warnings in place. Join me later for a full forecast.
And as ever, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet us at gbnews, and you can join into the debate about whether pink and green clashes. Dave in London's added his voice. He says, sorry, Tom, like Mike, I do like you, but I think the pink and green tie are not sartorially correct.
Not sartorially correct? Goodness, what verbosity from these GB News viewers this morning.
I must say, I don't have a problem with pink and green. I think it's lovely. So I'm sticking up for you there.
I think Liam has a comment.
Yeah, we've just had the latest inflation number for September. Is it up? Is it down? It's unchanged.
Okay.
Inflation in September, 6.7%, the same as August, 6.7%. The cost of living crisis is not easing. Inflation is still below the latest wage growth, which means real wages on average are rising. All eyes I'll be drilling down into these numbers, looking at food price inflation, energy price inflation, all of that. But all eyes will now be on the Bank of England, the 2nd of November, that next interest rate decision. It strikes me, with this, they could hold.
OK, we'll have more analysis on that breaking news. Inflation has unchanged. As we launch into the news this morning, more grim news from the Israel-Hamas conflict.
Well, the US President Joe Biden is expected to arrive in Israel shortly as part of a diplomatic mission amid growing concerns over the conflict. Biden is expected to spend part of today in Tel Aviv for talks with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to help in the safe release of hostages being held by Hamas and the growing humanitarian crisis in the Middle East.
Well, President Biden was then expected to travel on to neighbouring Jordan for talks about accelerating humanitarian assistance into Gaza. However, this stop was cancelled after the strike on the Al Ali hospital in Gaza City, which Palestinian officials are blaming on Israel. But Israel denies that and is blaming it on the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group.
Well, as President Biden left Washington, D.C., White House spokesperson John Kirby told reporters that Biden will pose tough questions in meetings with Israeli leaders.
He's said to be outraged by the explosion at a Gaza hospital that killed, we think, around 500 people, and stated he had directed his national security team to gather information about what exactly happened.
Well, political analyst Eric Ham joins us live from Washington. And Eric, I suppose it's very difficult. Before Joe Biden set off last night, much of the discussion was that this was an Israeli strike on this hospital. But now it seems like the discussion has moved. The Israeli Defense Forces have been publishing information online suggesting that actually this was a misfired Hamas rocket. Might it be the case that Biden's cancelled meeting with the Jordanians, with the Palestinian authorities, could they be back on the table, or is this a half-scuppered visit?
Well, look, what certainly happened at that hospital is certainly, I think, catastrophic and damaging, and it raises the stakes for President Biden's visit. But the United States has been a material supporter not only of Israel, but certainly of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and other countries in the region, including Egypt. And so I think if the president is traveling to an active war zone, those countries need to actually be there to meet with the president, particularly given that he is placing all of his political capital on this situation. By traveling to the region, President Biden is taking ownership of this. And this is very high risk with very low reward. And I think what we're seeing now is President Biden has got to be able, since he's owning this situation, he's got to be able to walk away with some clear safeguards or clear safeguards from many of these nations that he can somehow tamp down on the rising escalation that's taking place in the region.
There was some speculation that he'd only agreed to this visit with some sort of expectation of a result, whether that be in the ceasefire or the opening of the Rafah crossing to allow aid into the area and some Western citizens out of Gaza. Are those hopes, do you think, dashed somewhat by the breaking news overnight and the quite unequivocal response from the Arab world, with particularly the King of Jordan saying, I'm not even going to meet with you now?
Well, yeah, and look, the United States just last year signed a $10 billion aid agreement with Jordan that they will provide this much aid over the next 7 years. So the president is carrying a very big stick. And I think at any time, the president can also cut off that spigot of aid, not only to Jordan, but to other nations. And so President Biden, we know that President Biden has always, said one thing in public and did something very different in private. And the president certainly doesn't want to be seen as chiding or being critical of these leaders publicly. But I think now, given the fact that this is a war and there's growing concern that this could escalate, President Biden has got to really take this by the reins and take ownership. And he's got to be very forceful, even with countries, with leaders, the King of Jordan as well. Because, again, the United States is not coming here with hat in hand. The United States is a material supporter of many of these nations. And the president needs to actually make that clear, that there is some level of concern. And there are things that the president wants from these nations and also from Benjamin Netanyahu. And we know that relationship has certainly been tense. But right now, the president has got to be able to call in those chips, particularly given the fact that the United States has expended billions of dollars over these last few years in the region.
I suppose back at home, Biden's thinking about his own political situation, the accusations that he's a sleepy president, that he's someone that's not engaged, not involved, not hosting as many press conferences, not travelling as much as his predecessors. Do you think that perhaps that context made this trip inevitable? Would he have looked weak? Would he have looked lazy without it?
Well, I do believe that the fact that he is going to his second war zone in this year, I think it speaks to the fact that the president now is looking to change the narrative to show that he's actively engaged, he's actively involved. But the president needs more than a photo op. I mean, we saw that hospital, the carnage there. And also, too, now the president's got to be able, if the United States is going to continue to showcase itself as the world superpower, President Biden has got to act like it. He's got to be able to get those extractions from these world leaders while he is there. He's got to be able to say to Benjamin Netanyahu what he wants, and Benjamin Netanyahu has got to give President Biden what he wants. And otherwise, he could walk away, I think, with that same narrative as a feeble man who can't get what he wants on the world stage because he's too old and he's too feckless and unable to get these things done at a time when the world needs America to be engaged.
OK, Eric Ham, political analyst, joining us from Washington. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, in Gaza's deadliest day of this conflict, hundreds are feared killed at this explosion at the Al Arabi hospital in Gaza City overnight.
A Gaza Health Ministry spokesperson has said hundreds died at the building after what Palestinian officials said was an Israeli airstrike. Israel has denied it, blaming the blast instead on a failed rocket launch by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group, which itself has denied responsibility.
Well, initial reports suggest that a missile struck outside the building where hundreds of displaced Gazans have been residing after Israel gave the evacuation order for the northern part of the Strip. On Twitter, the Israel Defense Force posted the following clip.
Yes, in this clip, if you're listening on the radio, let us describe it for you. You can see a rocket launched into the sky from a built-up area. That's then intercepted, or we think explodes in what could have been an error. And then moments later, you can see a massive explosion. That's a few hundred metres away, this time on the ground. So with the question really that the whole world wants to know is whether or not this is a faulty Hamas rocket or an Israeli missile strike.
At the end there, you can see terrorists launch further rockets after the explosion from what appears to be the Gazan side of the border. Now, this incident came not long after the UN said a school sheltering thousands of people in central Gaza was also hit, killing at least 6 people.
Well, on GB News last night, the Israeli ambassador to the UK spoke to Nigel Farage and had this to say in response to, specifically, the hospital attack.
Want to check what happened, but I'm sure, and I can guarantee you, we never target civilians.
Well, world leaders have been quick to express outrage over the event, with protests sweeping nations across the Islamic world, like this scene here in Lebanon.
Oh, hopefully, there you go. Indeed, the Foreign Secretary condemning the actions and reiterating the importance to protect civilian life. Well, the hospital explosion comes as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is deepening. The United Nations has warned that Israel's bombing campaign and the blockade of Gaza in response to the Hamas attack on its communities is likely to be in breach of international law.
Yes, Israel has blocked supplies of food, water, fuel and electricity since the deadly Hamas attacks on the 7th of October, but denies that there is a humanitarian crisis.
Well, joining us now live from Tel Aviv is GB News reporter Charlie Peters. Good morning to you, Charlie. This feels like this conflict is on a knife edge right now, and it is incredibly important to establish the facts surrounding this tragedy with the explosion of a hospital in Gaza City.
Yes, there is a lot of confusion about that situation. We were reporting on the ground in Tel Aviv last night when that rocket barrage that you've just played was launched towards central Israel and specifically this city. And most of those rockets were intercepted, it appeared. But then when we returned to safety out of the shelter, news started to filter through from Gaza that there had been a significant explosion at the Baptist Christian Hospital in Gaza City. Now, reports immediately from the Gazan side claiming that this was an Israeli airstrike, and in the 2 hours that followed before the IDF spoke, there was a chain reaction across the region. In Lebanon, Hezbollah promised a day of rage in reaction to what they said was an Israeli strike. The the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said that he had to call off his meeting with President Biden. And there was all sorts of calls for protests outside of Israeli embassies throughout the region. But the fighting has enraged in southern Israel, of course, as this incident continues. And yesterday I sat down with a British Israeli soldier who is still fighting with Hamas.
At 7 a.m. they woke us up, told us that Israel is in a total war, and we need to get ready and that we are going down to the Gaza Strip.
Had you heard any reports about the extent of the Hamas violence in that kibbutz?
We didn't have reports. On our way, we opened phones to understand what's happening because the IDF couldn't understand what's happening because there was too much information going from everywhere. We saw the live streams of Hamas, and then we understand that something really strange is happening.
And when you got to the kibbutz building, that's when you engaged with the Hamas fighters there?
Yeah, before we saw a lot of stuff that Hamas terrorists did, a lot of bodies of innocent citizens. And when we came to Kibbutz Be'eri, it was the junction of Be'eri by the gate of the kibbutz. So we heard already all of the shooting, and we understand that the massacre is still happening. I have to say that the people of Be'eri fought very bravely. So a lot of time that we saw also bodies of Israeli innocent citizens in the houses, but also bodies of terrorists that we didn't kill. The people of Be'eri managed to kill some of them.
What was the fighting like? Very close combat, very close quarters?
Yeah, very close combat. Most of our combats are 5 to 7 meters from each other, or that they were inside the houses, and we try to break inside the houses. In every house, there were between 3 or 4 terrorists that stayed inside the houses. I saw 3 terrorists. I yelled to them IDF, IDF, because we didn't understand if they are terrorists or citizens, people that have weapons.
When did you suffer your injury? What happened?
I suffered it on Sunday evening. We did our last...
The last fight?
The last fight with terrorists, bad luck. A machine gun started to shoot on us from inside the house.
A machine gun shot at you from inside where you were? So you ran into a house and there was a terrorist inside there?
4 terrorists.
4?
We tried to shoot on the terrorists, they shot us back. My soldier that operates the machine gun fell down and dead in the place. I got injured in my stomach and in my hand. So I was out on my back because I was bleeding from the bat, from
the bullet in your stomach. Yeah.
Exactly, that I was not going to bleed. And I started shooting on the terrorist. I shot 90, 100 bullets on them. One of my soldiers threw a grenade, he couldn't put it inside the hallway, so it came to the living room where I was. It's closed. I have no idea why. As a religious man, I'm saying it's because God, but I didn't get injured from the grenade. So another officer of my unit managed to break inside the house from the kitchen window. He took me outside, then the tank came and finished the job.
Destroyed the house. The tank destroyed the house after you all pulled out.
On the terrorist. And we could gladly say that the kibbutz Be'eri has 0 terrorists inside of them. I have to say that I was really impressed from the brave of the citizens of Be'eri.
Right now, Israel is preparing for that likely invasion of the Gaza Strip. Do you think the country and the army is ready for the next phase of this war?
Of course.
You're ready to go again?
I will go again next week after I will heal.
Well, he is ready to go again, but the conversation now in Israel is what will happen next after that hospital explosion last night. The feeling in Tel Aviv is that the whole world, and in particular the region, has come out to blame them for an attack that they didn't do. That's their view here. The spokesman for the IDF this morning saying that 450 rockets from the Gaza Strip have fallen short inside the Strip since this conflict began. And also they've said that the Iron Dome does not intercept missiles when they are ascending. They only intercept when they are inside Israeli territory or over the sea. So they have poured water on that explanation that it could have been an interception that then fell back down onto the Gaza Strip. But significant confusion still remains as all sides blame each other at this extremely delicate tipping point for this war.
OK, Charlie Peters, thanks very much indeed.
Well, in the last few minutes, the Office for National Statistics has released the latest inflation figures, which remain stationary, flat at 6.7%. No change from August.
Well, our business and economics editor joins us now in the studio to explain it all. I mean, we say stationary and flat, but it still means, compared to this time last year, goods have gone up by 6.7%. It will be bad news for the government, probably, this morning.
Exactly right, Isabel. We must be completely clear about this. Doesn't mean that prices are flat. It means that prices in September were 6.7%, as you say, up from September 2022. It was the same in August. It was 6.8 in July. So really, inflation is flatlining, as you like. In the last few minutes, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has said, as we've seen across other G7 countries, because inflation is also flatlining in the US, albeit at a lower rate, 3.7%. As we've seen in other G7 countries, said our Chancellor, inflation rarely falls in a straight line, but if we stick to our plan, then we still expect it to keep falling this year. Rishi Sunak, of course, is on the hook. In January, he said he wanted to halve inflation. It was just above 10% at that point, so he needs it to get down closer to 5%. Just very, very briefly, why is inflation flatlining? Because food price inflation is coming down from 13.6% in August to 12.1% in September. So still very high food price inflation, but it's going in the right direction. Clothing inflation is coming down, but only slightly, from 7 to 6.9%. But the real issue here, and I'll be talking about it with you as we go through the morning, the real issue here is energy prices, and particularly petrol prices, up very sharply, not least because of the OPEC exporters cartel restricting supplies across the world, and now all the geopolitical fallout from these ghastly atrocities in Israel.
Liam, even before this incident, this escalation in the Middle East, I asked the Chancellor at Tory conference, are you confident that inflation will come down, given what I'm seeing at the petrol pump? And he made the point, look, inflation's lumpy, it often isn't a straight line. He was almost ready in preparing himself for this moment. But, there's almost a time lag, isn't there, with these events? And I don't want to be pessimistic. It's great that it's flattening, but actually, could it be worse next month in light of what's been happening?
It all depends on the geopolitics. I've been saying this on GB News for some time now. Even before this explosion of violence in the Middle East, it was clear that OPEC, that's the Arab countries, the oil exporting cartel, working with the Russians now, they have been deliberately restricting supplies, cranking up the price of oil, which obviously drives petrol and diesel prices, all energy prices. Between the mid-June and a month ago, oil prices already rose from $70 to around $85 a barrel. That's a big percentage increase. They're now up above $90 a barrel. That's up almost a third. Yeah. This is a huge percentage increase. And drivers have been detecting this. It hasn't really entered the political mainstream, but the reality is that geopolitics could scupper the attempts of the entire Western world to escape from this cost of living crisis. I don't want to be completely pessimistic. It has flatlined. I actually had a suspicion it might go up slightly, but the symbolism of inflation holding, as American inflation is holding, Eurozone inflation has come down slightly. It's 4.3%. So this isn't all bad news, but it certainly puts a question mark over our ability to finally escape from this ghastly cost of living crisis.
And it adds an extra dimension, doesn't it, to what President Biden and indeed the Prime Minister are going to try and achieve when they fly into the Middle East, because we saw the impacts on the economy here in the UK of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and effectively the West. Could we see, if the worst-case scenario happens, of this widening of this conflict in the Middle East, deepening the cost of living crisis here? I'm
afraid we could, Isabel. There's been rightly an awful lot of comparisons made with the interwar period and the atrocities of the Holocaust, understandably so. But as an economist, while absolutely respecting that comparison, I'd also make the comparison with the Yom Kippur War, which was 50 years ago, pretty much to the day since this original Hamas strike on Israel. During the Yom Kippur War, oil prices rocketed and the Arab world moved together within OPEC to really face down America and put on a huge oil embargo and a massive geopolitical event. We're not there yet. Yeah. OPEC is working, but on the fringes of commentary, you've got the Iranians crucially saying, we may start fighting this war on other fronts, said Tehran a couple of days ago. What does that mean? That means the possibility, just the possibility, but it's in the markets, in the prices now, that Iran could close what we call the Straits of Hormuz, that maritime pinch point going into the Persian Gulf, through which about a third of the world's oil supply every day flows. If the Iranians decide to start messing with that vital sea channel, the kind of Adam's apple of the world economy, then that is going to incense America, it's going to incense the West, and that is the route to proper escalation of violence across the Middle East. I'm not saying it's going to happen.
No, I know, but it's high stakes.
I'm not saying it's going to happen, but credible people in financial markets are now talking that it might.
Yeah, OK. Liam, with that, thank you very much indeed.
Well, still to come, we'll be asking if negotiating with terrorists is the correct decision. Can it yield results? That's next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamonn.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It's 7:27. If you're in Bedfordshire, you will be taking to the polls, hopefully tomorrow, to take part in the election. A new MP is being sought following the resignation of the former Cabinet Minister, Nadine Dorries, which triggered a by-election.
Well, the Tories have held onto the seat since 1931. But could that be about to change? Well, our reporter Will Hollis has been speaking with voters in the Bedfordshire town of Ampthill about the issues that matter to them.
In the barbers of mid-Bedfordshire, there's only one thing worth talking about: the upcoming by-election.
I've voted already. You have? I did it postal vote.
Darren's been cutting hair here for 30 years. Now he wants an MP that can do the same for taxes.
VAT for me is one thing that I find absolutely baffling. That's my biggest gripe. Obviously no one minds paying taxes because that's what we have to pay, but on a service industry like mine, I'd have to pay VAT, but I have no value-added tax to my business because we're non-vatable. That's my biggest gripe.
Only 50 miles from London, Bedfordshire is a commuter's dream. But for tight market towns like Ampthill, that's a nightmare for roads. Philip moved here from Luton in 1969. He wants an MP to fight for infrastructure and against pollution.
If you look at the buildings and their narrow streets, the damage that's coming from the pollution from trucks, buses, cars, is really damaging what Ampthill's all about, which is a Georgian market town.
The position as MP opened up in August when Nadine Dorries resigned after being refused a peerage. The former Culture Secretary had been MP since 2005. In fact, the Tories have clung on to this seat since 1931, but that could change for the rural constituency. Mid-Bedfordshire is dotted with small towns like Ampthill, but it's not just local things that matter here. National issues are driving voters too.
I think mostly I'm voting on national issues, really, because they're affecting all of us. So the cost of living crisis, the crisis in the NHS, which I think should be privatised, actually getting back into the single market for the European Union, because I think we shot ourselves in the foot.
It's not just about what a new MP would do. Voters are considering their qualities too.
Well, somebody that lives here would be nice. To be honest, and when you make promises, please keep them.
Unlike the last one that we had, which quite frankly was a nightmare.
Back in the barber's, Philip's already planning his next haircut. By then, he'll have a new MP. Voters might have gone for something different or the same as usual. Will Hollis, GB News in Ampthill.
Well, let's get some thoughts now from our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Good morning to you, Catherine. Now, we all laughed when that comment in the report there was somebody from the local area would be nice. It's almost an old-fashioned concept, isn't it, in this day and age? But I want to ask you about the leaked memo sent to Greg Hands saying that the Tory vote's expected to halve in the by-elections tomorrow, not just in Mid-Beds, but also where Chris Pincher's constituents are also going to the...
Tamworth.
Tamworth, thank you.
Yes, that's right. Greg Hands, the chair of the Conservative Party, a memo has leaked saying that they expect their vote share to halve from about 60% to 30%, both in Tamworth, which was Chris Pincher's seat, and indeed in Bedfordshire, which was Nadine Dorris's seat. Now, they're also preparing, if they lose those seats, and it's neck and neck in Tamworth, and it's currently a three-way race in Bedfordshire. So it's possible they could cling on to one or both. But if they lose them, they are preparing to blame Chris Pincher. Pincher by name, Pincher by nature is what Boris Johnson allegedly said. And Nadine Dorris personally. Now, Nadine Dorris, who was the MP for Bedfordshire since 2005, has already taken to Twitter to basically say, if we lose this, it's all Rishi Sunak's fault because Rishi Sunak pushed out Boris Johnson, and that was the first mistake. I have to say, I was in Ampthill, in the centre of this constituency, a few weeks ago. There is real anger there with the behaviour of Nadine Dorris. She said she was going to resign immediately in early June when she thought Boris Johnson was going to put her into the House of Lords. It then took her 11 weeks to actually resign because she realised that she wasn't going to get that peerage, and she was investigating, she said, what had gone wrong. Now, she's apparently moved out of the constituency. She hadn't spoken in the House of Commons for a year, but it seems like a lot of Conservative voters are going to simply sit on their hands and not vote. The Conservatives are estimating that only 5% of their previous voters will actually go direct to Labour. But it's a three-horse race. Labour and Lib Dems are both very cross with each other. They both think they're in with a chance. What could ultimately happen is the Conservatives could hang on and come through the middle.
Just really quickly, to confirm, we heard that Peter Bone lost the Conservative Party whip yesterday, which means he's sitting in the Commons as an independent. Does that affect the chances of a by-election, or does that remain as it was when we spoke to you yesterday, that there could be this third by-election in his constituency now of Wellingborough?
I think it's highly likely that that will happen. There can be a recall petition. If 10% of people in the constituency say, then there will be potentially yet another by-election, something that Rishi Sunak needs like a hole in the head. But I think worth remembering, whatever happens in these two by-elections, we'll get the results Friday morning, those voters are going to have to go back to the polls in about a year's time because we're not that far off a general election.
Could be just in the job for a year, who knows?
As Brenda from Bristol once said, there's too much politics going on at the moment.
Not
another one. Catherine, thank you.
Catherine.
Well, these are the candidates standing for the by-election in Bedfordshire. Sid Caudle is the Conservative candidate. No, hang on. That's Festus Akinbulu. Festus, I'm so sorry about this. It's very hard to read it from here.
And then Sid Caudle is running for the Christian People's Alliance. Prince Ankt, Love Emperor of India, he is running for a party of no description, we're told. Dave Holland for Reform UK.
Emma Louise Holland-Lindsay is running for the Liberal Democrats, Anne Kelly, the official Monster Raving Loony Party.
Gareth Mackey for the Independents, Chris Rooney, Mainstream, Cade Sibley for the Green Party.
Alistair Luce-Strathen, he's the Labour candidate. Alberto George Thomas for the Heritage Party. Alan Victor, the True and Fair Party.
And finally, Antonio Daniel Vintello, the English Democrats, putting England first. Just to explain, we have to, in the name of fairness, give all of the candidates a shout-out ahead of the election.
And aren't there a wonderful array of many different parties, all of which, I suppose it'll be a fun game. Which ones get to keep their deposits and which ones don't?
Yeah, well, there'll be a few probably that won't. Right, should we turn our attention to the big news of the moment? And one thing that we haven't discussed in the wake of this tragedy overnight, the bombing of the hospital, is the impact that that might have on hostages. We understand that Israel's military believe 199 people have been taken hostage by Hamas, and officials from the United States and other countries are determining if their citizens are among those captives, with President Biden arriving in Tel Aviv, we think, in the next hour for talks with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, on Wednesday night, it was suggested that Rishi Sunak could follow Biden's lead and go to Israel as soon as Thursday in a show of support. But now, with international pressure mounting by the minute for Israel to negotiate with Hamas and free hostages, we're asking whether negotiating with terrorists is ever a good idea.
Are Biden and Sunak fighting the wrong cause here? Well, security specialist Will Geddes says there's often no other way to free hostages, and therefore, of course, we should negotiate with them.
On the other hand, Mike Shearer says negotiating with terrorists only legitimises them and should be avoided where possible.
But would you negotiate with terrorists to free innocent civilians? Let's discuss this morning and start with you, Will Geddes. I suppose, you know, for you, you don't want to leave any man behind.
No, and I don't think, to be honest, Israel can afford for these civilians who have been so well publicised by Hamas to allow them to a dreaded fate by Hamas. They are in a position where it's somewhat untenable, where they have to be involved in some sort of dialogue. And this would not be the first time that it's happened. And although I know most countries will give a blanket statement of, we will not negotiate with terrorists, the reality is, sometimes you do. It doesn't have to necessarily be involved in political concessions. It doesn't have to necessarily be resolved in terms of financial concessions or a financial ransom being settled. It could be a prisoner exchange. There are many, many different ways you can come at this. But I think it's very important, certainly bearing in mind that Hamas have got a history of negotiating, certainly with Palestinians and also with Israel, that there will be a matured system in place with Hamas. The hardest bit is when you're dealing with very volatile individuals.
Yeah, Major Mike Shearer, though, you would be concerned this just encourages hostage-taking?
Well, it does. I mean, if we look back, the moral argument against negotiating with terrorists really goes back to 1973. When a Palestinian militant terrorist group took hostages in the Saudi embassy in Khartoum. There were three, if my memory serves me right, three Westerners, excuse me, involved in that. And they went to the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, and they said, can we discuss? And he said, absolutely not. We're not doing it. And we can take that further. You know, when we had Al-Qaeda, who were responsible for numerous kidnaps in Algeria, and from those kidnappings, we had France, Italy and Germany, who paid millions of euros. And what does that do? That boosts the coffers of the terrorist group. And what are the terrorists after? They're after either funding or concessions. And that's never a good thing when you're trying, as best you can in a civilized world, to deal with politics and democracies and the rule of law.
But if we apply this, dilemma to the situation that we're seeing in Israel, the fear is, this attack, that whatever happened, if it's a misfired Hamas missile, whether or not it was deliberate, whether it was the IDF, those facts haven't yet been established, but it will have consequences on the hostage situation. What do you think could be an outcome in terms of the hostages from that?
Well, I mean, it really does depend. I mean, Mike makes some very valid points. If there is a tactical rescue, that is really always the last resort, because ultimately it's where it's life or death. And in instances where Islamic State or Al-Qaeda have been involved in hostage hostage-taking. And there has been a tactical assault carried out by special forces. That would be really, in the last instances, when you have no other options available. The one thing that would certainly be involved, inevitably, will be the negotiation teams, probably from the UK and as well as the US, in assisting Israel in terms of looking at the strategies to extracting these hostages. And it really comes down to Hamas. Hamas, although Mike is absolutely right, yes, most terrorist groups are looking for funding. We know Hamas is getting funding already. They have a pretty large war chest. So the financial motivation won't be there. My feeling is, my gut feeling is, it will probably be some kind of prisoner exchange.
Mike Shearer, what do you make of this idea of a prisoner exchange? We think 200 people, of course, held in Gaza. Is not the priority for Israel to get their citizens home?
Well, look, let's just remind ourselves of who we're dealing with in Hamas. Their charter, initial charter written in 1988, basically stated that there is no solution to the Palestine question except through the obliteration of Israel and its people. It then updated this charter in 2008, 2010, which basically just said, OK, we will accept going back to the pre-1967 borders. So a bit of concession. Then again, more recently in 2017, they stated that the new document does not seek war on the Jewish people. Well, just look back 1 week ago, Saturday, and you can see that that's a nonsense. This is the type of people that you're dealing with. Can you credibly negotiate with people who simply will lie with a lie that can be reinforced in their ideology through their religious texts?
So what do you do then? You just say, bad luck, terrible, but, there are so many families, 199 we believe. We think there could be some British citizens amongst those, German as well, other foreign nationals. You just say hard luck, or the Israelis have already pledged we will leave no man behind.
Look, this is difficult. No negotiation, I would say. That doesn't mean no communication. And until the terrorists agree to something themselves, then that's the point where you get engaged. And really, ultimately, what you're after is the terrorist grouping laying down their terrorist notions and ideologies and looking to a political solution. The race, for both sides of this conflict, the race towards a Pyrrhic victory serves no one. Both sides need to recognise that an ideology cannot be solved through a bomb or a bullet. Attitudes need to change.
Yeah, this isn't going to be solved, is it, through violence? Will get us a Major Mike Shearer. Thank you both. We have to leave it there. We're out of time, but appreciate both of you coming in this morning.
Well, still to come, in the lead-up to Christmas, one charity is predicting that more than 1 million food parcels will be needed this winter. That's coming up next.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7.
No direct hit to the hospital itself. The only location damage is outside the hospital, in the parking lot, where we can see signs of burning, which I will show later, no cratering, and no structural damage to nearby buildings, as opposed to the damage caused by any aerial munition, which would have been of different nature. We would have seen craters and structural damage to the buildings, both of which haven't been identified in this incident. The size of the damage we see here is due to the warhead of the Islamic Jihad rocket, but most of the rocket's propellant is still evident due to the short flight of the rocket because the launch failed. The following visual evidence shows infrared imagery of the parking lot. You can see the central locations of fires, some debris of rooftops, no craters can be identified. I want to show you that.
Just if you're tuning in to let you know, we are listening to a live press conference from the Israeli Defence Force explaining what they believe happened in relation to this hospital bomb overnight.
We are showing the parking lot and the hospital. Okay, those are in red spot. This is not in infrared, so you can understand it betterly. This is the parking lot. This is the parking lot. You can see the parking lot also now in this picture shown here, okay? Aftermath, after the hit. There is no structural damage to the building. The walls stayed intact. There are no craters here. All of the above, which I said, no structural damage. The walls stay intact, no craters. These are the characterized that shows that it's not an aerial munition that have hit the parking lot. We also have examples of what air-to-ground munition creator looks like. As you can see, they do not exist in this instance. Many media outlets immediately reported the unverified claims by Hamas. Those were lies spread by Hamas. I want to make something clear. It is impossible to know what happened as quickly as Hamas claimed they knew. That should have been an initial warning sign for many. Unlike Hamas, the IDF launched an immediate examination, which was overseen at the very highest levels of command. This professional review was based on intelligence, operational systems, and aerial footage, all of which we cross-checked. The evidence, which we are sharing with you all, confirms that the explosion of the Ali al-Mahadani hospital in Gaza was caused by an Islamic Jihad rocket that was misfired. Here are the 4 main parts of the examination process. First, we confirmed that there was no IDF fire by land, sea or air that hit the hospital. Second, our radar system tracked rockets fired by terrorists from within Gaza at the time of the explosion. I will show you. The trajectory analysis from the barrage of rockets confirms that the rockets were fired close proximity to the hospital. In addition, there are two independent videos which show the failure of the rocket launch and the continuation of rocket flight towards the ground within the Gaza Strip, falling in the hospital compound. Third, we have intelligence, some that will be shared here, of communication between terrorists talking about rockets misfiring. The terrorists realize that the rocket has misfired and made specific reference to the Al-Hali Al-Ma'adani hospital. I would want to let everybody hear the conversation, and I will do the translation in English. I'm telling you, this is the first time that we see a missile like this falling, and so that's why we are saying it belongs to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. What? They are saying it belongs to the PGI. It's from us? It looks like it. Who says this? They are saying the shrapnel from the missile is local shrapnel and not like Israeli shrapnel. What are you saying, Abu Amar? But God bless, it couldn't have been found another place, not the hospital, to explode? Never mind, yes, Abu Raji. They shot it from the cemetery behind the hospital. What? They shot it coming from the cemetery behind Al Mahadani hospital, and it misfired and fell on them. There's a cemetery behind it? Yes, Al Mahadani is exactly in the compound. Where is it when you enter the compound? You first enter the compound and don't go towards the city. It's on the right side of Al Ma'adani hospital. Yes, I know it. We have cross-checked intercept with other intelligence sources to confirm this accuracy. It is common for rockets that are fired at Israel to land short and fall inside Gaza. These rockets fall short of Israel and have caused Palestinian casualties. During this war, we have counted approximately 450 rockets that misfired and fell inside Gaza. Palestinian civilians pay the price. I want to show you the footage. These are failed launches during this war, until now. These are all failed launches that fell inside the Gaza Strip, and some of them, of course, created casualties among the Palestinians themselves. And one of them was in the hospital Al-Hali Al-Mahamadani. We are also sharing this information with our partners. First and foremost, the United States. We want the maximum transparency because we take any incident involving civilians very, very seriously. Unfortunately, many in the media immediately reported the statements coming out from Hamas, controlled in Gaza, which blamed Israel. Instead of waiting for the examination of a credible information from the IDF, some media outlets ran with Hamas lies. Some of those headlines are still up, have not been corrected. I understand the desire to break news, but I hope you will all agree the accuracy and credible information comes before speed. The IDF acts in accordance with the international law. In conclusion, this incident shows how allegations, in this case false and baseless allegations made by terrorists against Israel, can spread and flame tension in the region. I will now answer questions.
Any time in CNN. I'm wondering if you could how an Islamic cause. And second of all, I'd also.
Well, if you are just tuning in to breakfast here on GB News to give you an update on the breaking news in the last few moments, we've been listening to a press conference from the Israeli Defence Force within Israel, who have comprehensively denied any strike on a hospital in Gaza City last night and have accused media outlets of buying the Hamas propaganda, including what they called an inflated number of casualties. Of course, we haven't been able to cross-check this ourselves. We haven't heard from American intelligence, British intelligence, or indeed the United Nations. But on this account, the Israelis say that they have done a professional review using aerial footage, and they say that a rocket was misfired by Islamic Jihad and that there was no direct hit of any hospital itself. They showed videos of a car park that didn't crater. They said this wasn't the hospital's structural buildings. It was indeed the car park. And as I say, they deny responsibility for what unfolded in Gaza City at 6:59 p.m. local time. We'll keep a close eye on that press conference and indeed what this means for the visit of the President of the United States, who is due to arrive in Israel in the next few minutes.
The existence of propellant made a larger explosion than the warhead itself. And it caused the damage of explosion that we see of the burning cars here, okay? Because the existence of a large amount of propellant inside. This is the reason all those cars...
To recap some of what has been said by the Israel Defence Force, the fire they claim happened at the hospital was due to the short flight of the rocket, i.e. the rocket must have taken off from close to the hospital for its fuel to ignite. They claim that craters would have been seen in the car park were it an Israeli rocket, and aerial footage shows no craters. They also claimed it would have been impossible to know exactly what has happened immediately after the event, as Hamas sent out their lines on the issue. They say instead considered reviews must take place, and Israel is only now giving its considered review many hours after the event and after examining footage and aerial photography.
We'll have more for you in just a few moments and what all of this means for President Biden's imminent visit to the region. First of all, though, let's take a look at the weather here in the UK.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Good morning. Storm Babet is moving in through the rest of today, bringing some very heavy rain, particularly tomorrow across eastern parts of Scotland. But even today, we could see some issues, heavy showers developing across parts of the Midlands and southern England, turning very wet here through this afternoon and the evening. The wind strengthening as well. For large parts of the UK, it is another dry day. Much of eastern England and a good part of Scotland turning dry once the early rain clears from the west. Temperatures will be again into the teens, feeling a bit cooler because of the winds, especially across the south as the rain peps up here, but also going to see some heavy rain through the evening time across Northern Ireland. Met Office warning in place for that, and then this band of rain becomes slow moving over parts of northern England before working into southern Scotland through the night. So again, slow moving nature, persistent heavy rain could cause some problems. Temperatures holding up overnight, so it won't be a cold night at all, but the rain could continue through Thursday across these eastern parts of Scotland. That's where we have a Met Office amber warning in place. The wind's also likely to be an issue, particularly across parts of Scotland, especially to the far northwest. Some very strong gusts here. So, as I say, we have a number of Met Office warnings in place. Check out the website for more details on that. Further south tomorrow, there will again be some heavy showers. Some brighter spells in between. Temperatures, again, mid to even high teens, but feeling cooler where it's wet and very windy.
Good morning. It's just coming up to 8 o'clock. You're with GB News. Now, as we await the imminent arrival of the US President Joe Biden into Israel, a White House spokesperson has said that the president will put tough questions to Israel during his visit. The blame game begins after an explosion at a hospital in Gaza kills potentially hundreds of people.
Well, good morning. It's just about to go 8 o'clock here in the UK. It is Wednesday, the 18th of October, and you're tuned into Breakfast with Isabel, Webster and Tom Harwood. And here's what's leading the news this morning.
Joe Biden's visit to Jordan with Arab leaders has been cancelled as he makes his way to the Middle East for an extraordinary wartime visit today. The president is seeking to demonstrate America's support for Israel's mission to eliminate Hamas, while also pressing for ways to ease humanitarian suffering in Gaza.
However, Biden's visit comes as a deadly explosion hits the Al Ali Arab Hospital in Gaza City overnight. Some confusion over the numbers of casualties. The Palestinian Medical Authority claiming 500 people were killed, including many sick women and children.
And life on the front line. We have an exclusive interview with a British man who travelled to Israel to fight in the war on Hamas.
I have to say that the people of Be'eri fought very bravely. So a lot of time that we saw also bodies of Israeli innocent citizens in the houses, but also bodies of terrorists that we didn't kill. The people of Be'eri managed to kill some of them.
And back here in the United Kingdom, we'll take a look at the latest we'll be looking forward to the Bedfordshire by-election, the seat which up until recently was held by Nadine Dorries.
And of course, Alex Deakin will have your weather.
Storm Babet is on the way, bringing some torrential rain and some persistent rain as well. And the combination of those likely to cause some problems over the next few days. There's also going to be some strong and gusty winds. There are a number of Met Office warnings in place. Join me later for a full forecast.
And a reminder, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet us at gbnews. Well, our top story this morning, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, is expected to arrive in Israel in the next few moments as part of a diplomatic mission amid growing concerns over the conflict. President Biden is expected to spend part of today in Tel Aviv for talks with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to try and help the safe release of hostages held by Hamas and to ease the growing humanitarian crisis in the Middle East.
President Biden was then expected to travel on to Jordan for talks about accelerating humanitarian assistance to Gaza. However, this part of his visit has been cancelled after the strike on that hospital in Gaza City, which Palestinian officials blamed on Israel, but Israel has this morning blamed on the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group.
Well, as President Biden left Washington, D.C. last night, his White House spokesperson John Kirby told gathered reporters that Mr. Biden will pose tough questions in his meetings with Israeli leaders.
Biden says he was outraged by the explosion at a Gaza hospital that potentially killed hundreds of people and stated he directed his national security team to gather information about exactly what has happened.
Well, we can speak now to the United States political analyst, Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes, who joins us in the studio. Very good morning to you. Some pretty big developments in the last hour, just hearing from the Israeli Defense Force quite comprehensively denying any involvement in the strike on a hospital and even questioning the numbers of casualties. Of course, one of the first casualties in any war is always the truth. It's really important to get independent verification in any of this, and all eyes, frankly, on the United States. Do you think that President Biden can provide that in this hour of crisis?
That he can provide it? My understanding is that they can check the DNA of the bombs. And so based on that, then we'll get the true answer of whether it came from Hamas or Israel.
And how important is that to the situation as we face it today? Does it change the American support of Israel if it is found to have been in any way the work of the IDF?
It won't change the support of Israel, but then hopefully the head of Jordan and Egypt and Abbas will reconvene the meeting. I can understand why they canceled it. Netanyahu had invited Biden in 2021 to come over. So the fact that he's coming over for this is really significant.
Could he have done anything else? Of course, there's much criticism of Biden back at home in the United States as being perhaps not as on top of issues as some of his predecessors, perhaps someone who calls fewer press conferences, is less visible, is less active as a president, perhaps due to his age. Is this not just a moment to deal with serious crises in the Middle East, but also to prove his mettle as a world leader?
Well, I don't think it's his age. I think it's his memory that has something to do with it. And I'm really against when people say someone's too old or the age, but he's got some memory problems and he needs some cheat sheets. But former Secretary of State Gates said that Joe Biden never made a right foreign policy decision in his life. And when that is hanging over him, I'm very nervous about it. I really am, because he has to be at his best for this. The respect for the U.S. by other countries is just not there. Blinken was to have a meeting with Mohammed bin Salman, and he showed up, he waited hours, and Mohammed bin Salman didn't show up till the next morning. That is a high insult to our Secretary of State. I don't know if there are going to be other reactions like that to Biden.
Well, I mean, the drawbridge has been pulled up, metaphorically, by the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, saying he doesn't even want to meet him. I mean, there could be no clearer message, frankly, that they see Israel as being in some way involved in this strike on the hospital, and they're not prepared to talk to the United States.
Well, that's exactly true. And again, we don't know who's responsible, but I can understand the position that they take. If he doesn't handle this well enough, what I'm really worried about is all the other Arab nations that will come in and will support Hamas. And that is not a good thing for the world at all.
So a lot is riding on what could just be one meeting, what could be a series of meetings. After all, if perhaps more individuals, organisations come out and verify further what has happened in Gaza overnight, if it does appear to be the case that this was actually a rocket fired from Gaza rather than from Israel that caused this mess, it could be that some of these meetings are back on. President Biden could turn this around. What would a successful visit look like?
Well, a successful visit would, number one, he would let all the humanitarian aid in. Two, what would really be ideal, but you never have this happen with Hamas, is to evacuate the people so that there are far less casualties. But Hamas's strategy is to use people as deterrents.
Well, is that fair? I mean, at the moment, Egypt has said they don't want civilian refugees, and neither does Jordan. So, you know, it's not just Hamas saying that they won't let civilians out. The civilians haven't got anywhere to go at this point, apart from those who are lucky enough to hold dual citizenship, some of which have left via sea. But at the moment, there's no land exit and certainly no air exit from the Strip.
Well, I think what's fascinating is that the Arab nations don't want the Gazans. And they're very explicit about that. So it really is a very tough situation when you don't want to kill people, but then the Palestinians, I mean, the Palestinian Authority is considered it's recognized internationally. And so are the Palestinians that are not part of the Gazans, how are they protected? And are they even letting the Gazans come over to the Palestinian side there?
OK, Jan Halper-Hayes, fascinating to talk to you this morning as we await the arrival of President Biden in Israel. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely terrifying, I suppose, for those nations around. Egypt, after all, President Sisi is in post because the Muslim Brotherhood was sort of forced out. Do they want to bring back in more radical religious elements to what is now more of a secular administration?
And
really
Jordan has been hugely impacted by what's happened in Syria and indeed what's happened over on the West Bank over the years, having taken in a huge number of refugees. They simply cannot sustain anymore, and they've made that perfectly clear as well.
And are a crucial partner for Western nations in the fight against terrorism as well, one of the few allies in the region.
Well, let's reflect then on what has been, we think, Gaza's deadliest day of the conflict so far. We believe hundreds, although we can't say exactly how many, were killed in an explosion at the Al Ali Arabi Hospital in Gaza City at 6:59 local time.
Well, a Gaza Health Ministry spokesman said that hundreds died at the building after what Palestinian officials said was an Israeli airstrike.
Israel has blamed the blast on a failed rocket launch by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group, which has themselves denied responsibility. Israel's recorded some 450 rockets falling short within the Gaza Strip as they accuse Hamas of inflating the casualty numbers.
Well, initial reports suggest a missile struck outside the building where hundreds of displaced Gazans have been residing after Israel gave the evacuation order for the northern part of the Strip. On X, formerly known as Twitter, the Israeli Defense Force posted the following video clip.
And in it, you can see a rocket launched into the sky from a built-up area. It's intercepted or perhaps explodes in what they claim was an error. And moments later, you can see a massive explosion a few hundred metres away on the ground. And the question, I suppose, for the international community to decide today is whether or not this was indeed a faulty Hamas rocket or an Israeli missile strike. At the end, you can see terrorists launch rockets after the explosion, presumably either in retaliation or continuation of those strikes.
Well, the incident came not long after the UN said a school sheltering thousands of people in central Gaza was also hit, killing at least 6 people.
Well, on GB News last night, the Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom spoke to Nigel Farage and had this to say in response to the hospital attack.
I want to check what happened, but I'm sure and I can guarantee you we never target civilians.
Well, world leaders have been quick to express outrage over the event, with protests sweeping nations across the Islamic world, like this scene here in Lebanon.
Well, the hospital explosion comes as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is deepening. The United Nations has warned that Israel's bombing campaign, as well as the blockade of Gaza in response to the Hamas terror attack on its communities, is likely to be a breach of international law.
Israel has blocked supplies of food, water, fuel and electricity since the deadly Hamas terrorist attacks on the 7th of October. But it denies there is a humanitarian crisis.
Well, let's go now to Tel Aviv and speak to our reporter, Charlie Peters. Good morning to you, Charlie. It's all happening where you are. Not only are you expecting President Biden to arrive there, having now been snubbed by King Abdullah, but we've heard from Tel Aviv in the last half an hour a fairly robust denial and certainly using aerial footage and what they describe as a professional review of that strike on that hospital in Gaza City, claiming it was not their fault. How important is it for them to prove that to the international community?
Well, it's vital because last night the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan and loads of other nations in the region all came out to blame Israel for the strike after the Hamas-run health ministry and Palestinian authorities in the Gaza Strip blamed the strike on Israel in the moments immediately after the hospital explosion. It took 2 hours for the IDF to release a statement after reports of the explosion where they said that it was not them and that they had evidence of the attack being caused by a failed missile launch by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, one of the many liberation terrorist groups based in the Gaza Strip. And they've released more, not by any means conclusive, but certainly more compelling evidence this morning showing both imagery and signals intelligence of what occurred yesterday. They've shown the blast radius where this attack is said to have occurred, which does not fit with the typical crater you might expect from an 1,000-pound bomb or the JDAMs used by the Israeli Air Force. And they've also released signals intelligence of what they say is a conversation between Hamas terrorists inside the Gaza Strip. Now, that is a rare move by the IDF to reveal a signals intelligence source, because of course once they make that information public, that intelligence source will be immediately removed. That won't exist anymore. By contrast, in the Hamas side and in the Palestinian side, there has not been much evidence released this morning, but there were emotive statements last night. A press conference held in the hospital in the hours after the attack showed doctors standing around while bodies covered in white sheets were there, describing the horror of the incident around them. And there is also a failure to confirm the number of the dead in this very horrifying and confusing situation. Footage released this morning does seem to show the car park outside the hospital with a large explosion and cars ruined, but there's no crater, which you'd expect to be consistent with an Israeli airstrike. And there are questions about how a failed missile launch could create such a large explosion. When we've seen missiles intercepted over Tel Aviv, and we've seen them day and night, they make a much smaller explosion than the one we saw on the ground. And even when they do land, and there have been a few successful missile strikes here in central Israel, they also don't make anywhere near to that size of explosion. So questions are remaining as to what caused that explosion and what contributed to the size of the fireball seen on live feeds on the Gaza Strip at the time. There are a couple of competing theories in Tel Aviv this morning. One is the potential that the hospital was used to store munitions. We have seen a pattern of Hamas storing munitions and weapons in civilian areas over the years. In 2014, rockets and weapons were found in schools and hospitals very regularly by UN observers. And there's also this question about fuel. Could the IDF blockade of Gaza have contributed to this explosion, insofar as they cut off electricity supplies, of course, when this war started to the Gaza Strip, as well as water supplies, a move decried by the international community in many parts as a war crime. And so fuel was used to power generators to keep hospitals running. So many of these hospitals having very flammable objects around them at the time of this conflict escalating. Could that have contributed to the large fireball we saw erupt over the Christian Baptist Hospital yesterday evening? Well, the questions continue, and there's by no means any conclusive proof, but it's certainly the Israeli side putting forward that compelling evidence-based picture this morning, while the Palestinian side is still running on the support of regional partners, but no further evidence to confirm on their side that the Israelis carried out this strike.
OK, Charlie Peters, for now, thank you very much indeed.
Well, closer to home, voters in mid-Bedfordshire are electing a new Member of Parliament this week after the resignation of former Cabinet Minister Nadine Dorries, which, of course, triggered a by-election.
Well, the Conservatives have held on to the seat since 1931, but could that all be about to change? Our reporter Will Hollis has been speaking with voters in the Bedfordshire town of Ampthill about the issues that matter to them.
In the barbers of mid-Bedfordshire, there's only one thing worth talking about: the upcoming by-election.
I've voted already. You have? I did it postal vote.
Darren's been cutting hair here for 30 years. Now he wants an MP that can do the same for taxes.
VAT for me is one thing that I find absolutely baffling. That's my biggest gripe. Obviously no one minds paying taxes because that's what we have to pay, but on a service industry like mine, I'd have to pay VAT, but I have no value-added tax to my business because we're non-vatable. That's my biggest gripe.
Only 50 miles from London, Bedfordshire is a commuter's dream. But for tight market towns like Ampthill, that's a nightmare for roads. Philip moved here from Luton in 1969. He wants an MP to fight for infrastructure and against pollution.
If you look at the buildings and the narrow streets, the damage that's coming from the pollution from trucks, buses, cars, it's really damaging what Ampthill's all about, which is a Georgian market town.
The position as MP opened up in August when Nadine Dorries resigned after being refused a peerage. The former Culture Secretary had been MP since 2005. In fact, the Tories have clung on to this seat since 1931, but that could change for the rural constituency. Mid-Bedfordshire is dotted with small towns like Ampthill, but it's not just local things that matter here. National issues are driving voters too.
I think mostly I'm voting on national issues, really, because they're affecting all of us. So the cost of living crisis, the crisis in the NHS, which I think should be privatised, actually getting back into the single market for the European Union, because I think we shot ourselves in the foot.
It's not just about what a new MP would do. Voters are considering their qualities too.
Well, somebody that lives here would be nice. To be honest, and when you make promises, please keep them.
Unlike the last one that we had, which quite frankly was a nightmare.
Back in the barber's, Philip's already planning his next haircut. By then, he'll have a new MP. Voters might have gone for something different or the same as usual. Will Hollis, GB News in Ampthill.
Well, let's get some thoughts now from our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. And Catherine, this is a very interesting three-way race, potentially. The bookies' odds have been all over the place. Could the Tories hold on?
They absolutely could hold on. Nadine Dorries had a whopping nearly 25,000 majority. She's held the seat since 2005, but the current polling suggests that Labour and the Conservatives are neck and neck on 29% and the Lib Dems just a bit behind on 22%. So it is perfectly possible that the Conservatives will hang on here. I have to say there's a lot of crossness between Labour and the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems basically think that Labour should have butted out of this seat, that this is their classic sort of territory in the supposed blue wall, that they would have a good chance of taking this seat. But Labour really are riding high in the polls. They are increasingly confident that they're heading for government, and they think that nowhere is off limits. Now, Conservatives think that only about 5% of Conservative voters will go directly across to Labour, but it is likely that a lot of them will simply sit on their hands and not vote, because I was in the constituency a few weeks ago. It's a lovely part of the world, just 50 miles north of London, but very rural, lovely little market towns. But there is a lot of anger with Nadine Dorries. She hadn't spoken in the House of Commons for over a year, and then she said she was going to resign immediately at the beginning of June when she thought she was heading for the House of Lords. When it then appeared that, in fact, she wasn't getting a seat in the House of Lords that Boris Johnson had wanted to give her, she then took nearly 3 months to actually resign. They feel that they effectively haven't had an MP for about a year, haven't had any representation. So it will be fascinating to see what happens here. A bit further north in Tamworth, it's a race between Labour and the Conservatives. They are neck and neck. So it could be that the Conservatives, despite the fact they're going to certainly lose a lot of their vote share, could hang on in either or both of these seats on Friday morning.
Catherine Forster, for now, thank you very much.
Well, these are the candidates standing for the by-election in mid-Bedfordshire. Festus Akinbusi is the Conservative candidate. Sid Cordell is standing for the Christian People's Alliance. Prince Ankit is standing for the Love Emperor of India. And Dave Holland is the Reform UK candidate.
Emma Louise Holland Lindsay is the Liberal Democrats candidate. Anne Kelly, standing for the official monster-raving Looney Party. Gareth Mackey is the independent candidate. Chris Rooney for mainstream, and Cade Sibley for the Greens.
But it doesn't stop there. Alistair Lou Streathern is standing for Labour. Alberto George Thomas is standing for the Heritage Party, and Alan Victor for the True and Fair Party.
And finally, Antonio Daniel Vintello is the English Democrats putting England first candidate.
What a fun, big list of names. As always, by-elections in this country, always a roster of fun. I'm looking forward to actually seeing them all standing. I wonder who's going to wear silly costumes.
Yeah.
The Monster Raving Looney Party usually quite good for that.
Yeah. Right, the time's 8:23. Should we take a look at some of the other stories coming into the newsroom this morning? A pretty busy news day. Greta Thunberg was yesterday arrested whilst linking arms and chanting with other activists outside a hotel in Mayfair in the capital. The Swedish environmentalist was taken to Wandsworth police station during a demonstration against a meeting of oil executives. The Metropolitan Police said they arrested the activists after they refused to move.
First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, has pledged to freeze council tax across the country for the next year. The First Minister announced ambitious plans to issue bonds to help fund, quote, vital projects. The SNP government will also spend an additional £300 million on tackling NHS waiting lists in the next 3 years.
The French President Emmanuel Macron said the return of Islamist terrorism poses a threat to all European nations. His comments come a day after 2 Swedish football fans were shot dead in a terrorist attack in Brussels before Belgium's Euro 2024 qualifier against Sweden. Belgian police say the suspect, who identified himself online as a member of Islamic State, has been killed. Coming up, we reflect on the inflation figures out this morning. They stuck fast at 6.7%. Full analysis with Liam Halligan after this.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Well, we welcome Andrew Griffith, Cabinet Minister, Economic Secretary to the Treasury. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. I want to start by talking to you about the latest developments in this Middle Eastern conflict, with President Biden due to fly in, the Jordanians cancelling their meeting with him, and now questions over who was responsible for that strike on a hospital which has killed hundreds of civilians. What's your reading of the situation this morning?
Well, the destruction of the Al Ari hospital is devastating, and all of our thoughts go out to everybody who's been affected, all of the innocent civilians on both sides of this conflict, and the government's priority has always been the protection of civilian life. We'll work with allies to try and get to the bottom of what happened. More generally, we're supporting diplomatic efforts across the region to try and prevent escalation, to bring peace and to minimise life, and that includes the humanitarian support that the Prime Minister announced earlier this week for the people of Gaza.
Much speculation as to whether or not the Prime Minister will follow in the President of the United States' footsteps and visit Israel this week. Can you give any clear line on whether or not that's going to happen, on whether or not a decision has been made?
I can't add anything to the speculation, but I can confirm the Prime Minister has been at the heart of diplomatic efforts. He's spoken to the leaders of both the Gaza itself, of Egypt, of the King of Jordan, and of course staying very closely in touch with our international allies. So there's a lot that the Prime Minister and the UK is doing already in this space.
Yeah, it certainly feels as though this conflict is on a knife edge in the wake of this strike on a hospital. We've heard, whilst you've been on air with other broadcasters this morning, from the Israeli Defence Force robustly denying their involvement, pointing to what they described a professional review and aerial imagery. Meanwhile, Hamas and the Palestinian Health Authority adamant that it was not them. What role will British intelligence play in trying to establish the facts in all of this? Because, of course, from those involved directly in the war, quite often it's impossible to rely on any intelligence that they offer to the media.
Yeah, it's important that in time, and I'm sure it will take time, that facts come out. We must remember that the Israeli army is a professional, uniformed army. It's under civilian and democratic control. Hamas is a terrorist, and Islamic Jihad are both prescribed terrorist organisations. So we've got to be very careful in both our language and how we frame these things. If the UK has intelligence assets that it can put to work, we will do so, and it's right that everyone tries to get to the bottom of this, which is of course just one part of human suffering that took place ever since the invasion and the abductions that we saw in Israel last week.
Just to read between the lines there on your description of, on the one side, terrorist organisations saying what happened, and on the other, a democratic country saying what happened, should we take from that the view of the British government is we should be more likely to trust the Israelis than those in Gaza?
No, we should be careful in our language and careful, in how some people draw equivalence. It's right to follow the facts. Let's get to the bottom of that. And it's also right, and the UK's position is always that international law and humanitarian considerations are incredibly important. That's one of the core roles of the UK in this rules-based order, in upholding international law. So we should just all be careful about our language. It's a time for people to be responsible and to support all of the diplomatic efforts that are going on, strenuously going on, to minimise loss of any human life on either side of this conflict.
OK, I want to ask you some questions now in your capacity as Economic Secretary to the Treasury. The figures released by the Office for National Statistics this morning saw that inflation remained at 6.7%, a bit of a blow for the government.
Well, we always said it would be challenging. It's an ambitious target, but it's absolutely the right priority to have. Inflation robs people of their purchasing power, the value of their savings. And so in a world where governments have to make difficult choices, prioritising the fight to halve inflation this year was the right one. This is broadly in line with expectations, so there's still a quarter left to go. We will see some of the benefits of continued reduction in energy prices. And one of the figures that we saw in the subtext of what came out today, where inflation was flat for the month of September, is that food inflation fell by a percentage point. And that's valuable because that's what speaks to people's shopping baskets at the end of the week or month.
What do you say to those who say that inflation in the United States is considerably lower than it in the United Kingdom? Even in the Eurozone now, inflation lower than in the United Kingdom. The Labour Party saying this morning that next year the UK is expected to have one of the highest levels of inflation of any major advanced economy.
Well, I'm taking no lessons from the Labour Party. Their plans to borrow an additional £28 billion a year is precisely what would keep interest rates and inflation higher for longer and undo all of the good work that we've done, which still offers the prospect of achieving our target to halve inflation this year. In terms of general economies, we're broadly in the middle of the pack on most metrics with most other big Western G7 economies. Of course, in the UK, we protected households to a larger extent than in the US. We helped people more with their energy bills. We helped more people during COVID. And we're paying some of the price of that. But it was the right decision that we took to protect people then. And it's why we continue to make difficult but responsible decisions to bear down on inflation. That plan is working, as shown by today's figure, but there is still more to do.
Andrew Griffith, is that you saying that the Prime Minister, then the Chancellor, his decision to go so large with the furlough package, with the emergency COVID loans, with all of that, much, much more spending by the British state than comparatively happened in the United States, are you saying that's partly to blame for our higher inflation today?
The level of our borrowing is one of the reasons why we're having to make difficult but responsible decisions and why we're having to work very hard to bear down on inflation. But those were the right decisions at the time and we protected people, we gave them very significant help, things like the very successful furlough scheme that helped employment and protect businesses and reduce some of the scarring that we would otherwise have seen.
OK, Andrew Griffith, Economic Secretary to the Treasury, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. We go straight to our Business and Economics editor for his take on all of that. What did you make of what you just heard?
I think Andrew Griffith he's a pretty competent city minister. He's a very financially literate guy. I think he's making the best of a bad pitch, really. It is disappointing for the government that inflation has flatlined. It is, as you said rightly, Tom, as we were discussing in the earlier hour, striking that UK inflation is 6.7%, and in the US it's 3.7%, and in the Eurozone it's 4.3%. Yes, we have spent more money supporting households, in particular with their electricity bills, but that is because electricity in the UK is getting on for 3 times more per unit, retail unit, than it is in the US, because the way of our electricity market is structured, because US energy is much cheaper because they've been fracking and so on. But look, there's some really interesting numbers here. While you've been going through other stories, I've been sitting here nerding away. Let me just give you a few of them. Food inflation still 12.1% in September, up on September 2022. So food prices are not coming down, even though the annual food inflation number is slightly down. Here's an interesting one, and a lot of people are getting really confused about this. I'm seeing press releases from august economic bodies that are actually confused, and I'll tell you why. Because petrol in September was 5.1% more expensive than in August, OK? It was $1.53 a litre. And the same with diesel, 6.3% more expensive in September than in August. But the annual inflation figure, if you think about petrol and diesel are still now cheaper than they were in August, in September 2022 by a considerable margin. So fuel prices, even though they're up on the month, year on year, they're actually dragging the headline inflation number down. Now, that doesn't mean that petrol and diesel won't get more expensive this autumn, particularly if oil prices balloon on all this geopolitical risk, not least in the Middle East, but also elsewhere. What do I think is going to happen on November the 2nd, Thursday, November the 2nd, when the Bank of England next meets to convene and decide interest rates? Well, interest rates are currently 5.25%. I think the fact that inflation is flat and hasn't gone up means there's still a chance that the Bank of England could hold interest rates. But if inflation had actually come down, then there'd be more chance that the Bank of England would hold interest rates. In all, I think We've probably got one more interest rate rise to go. That will be 15, all the way up to 5.5%. In December 2021, 0.1% was the Bank of England's interest rate. That was still the emergency COVID measure. Look, lots of numbers. It's not great news on inflation, but it's not terrible news. I do think, on balance, the Bank of England will probably hold in November, as I said earlier, but there are big geopolitical risks.
Liam, I just really, very, very briefly want to get your reaction to Andrew Griffith almost saying that this was the United Kingdom government's fault for spending and borrowing so much during COVID and to support people with energy bills, that is one of the reasons why our inflation is higher in the UK than the American level of inflation is. Did he just put his boss in it? Did he just blame Rishi Sunak's COVID spending for our inflation?
You know, it's obviously, the headlines are wall-to-wall Middle East at the moment, understandably. You know, the occasional sort of economic interjection from the likes of me just about making it into the bulletins. And I'm not complaining, that's news, right? This is what we do. But underneath all the headlines, and even barely making it, the COVID inquiry is going on. The COVID inquiry is going on, and lots of pretty august people are saying some pretty striking things about the mistakes of lockdown. So I do think ministers are now starting to distance themselves from that policy of lockdown. We did lock down pretty much harder than any other country in the Western world. We did close schools, unlike Sweden. We got this massive long inquiry that's going to go on for years. Singapore and Sweden, they've already done their inquiries and implemented the recommendations. So I do think we're going to see canny ministers distancing themselves from those lockdown-first policies in the weeks to come, whenever they get the chance.
Liam, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have a quick look at the sport. We've got Paul Coit here to bring us some light relief to a lot of sort of heavy news this morning.
My maths O-level just about will give me some numbers as well, Liam. So England 3, Italy 1. First time in 46 years that England have managed to beat Italy at home. Harry Kane, 24 goals now, which is a record, which is the most goals scored by an Englishman playing at home, which has beaten Bobby Charlton's record, which goes back a long time. So a lot of numbers, a lot of records broken, and never have England won the European Championships. And I think next year there will be a number one.
It's
I
coming
feel very
home.
Strongly. How many times have we said?
We have one good game. Oh, we're going to win it. We're going to win it. It's the English disease. Take the pressure off.
Economics, mister, and I'll stick to the sport. We're going to be absolutely fine. Trust me, we're going to be absolutely fine. No, I do feel very. I think we're looking very good. And Jude Bellingham, he's 20 years old, and the kid is incredible. And with him playing as well, running the midfield, I think we're going to be absolutely fine. So I will say it now, and I think this time it's going to look
music to our ears. Something to look forward to.
Even though there's a disbelieving economics man at the background.
We'll take it.
I love football, and I remember that England victory over Italy. I remember.
Really?
Yeah,
Kevin Keegan?
Yeah, the old Keegan-Brooking combo.
You're slightly older than you look.
Brooking, such a cultured player.
Absolutely. And also, I should mention, England-South Africa, we've got two big World Cup England-South Africa games. So, of course, the Rugby World Cup, which is on Saturday, semi-final. But also, England are playing South Africa in the Cricket World Cup on Saturday. South Africa lost to the Netherlands yesterday, which was music to our ears again, because although England lost to Afghanistan, which was a real surprise, this is an even bigger surprise. And South Africa and England in the cricket, and it's a game that England absolutely have to win on Saturday. So hopefully a double against the South Africans.
Absolutely.
All eyes on that.
Yeah. Paul, with that, thank you very much indeed. Stay with us, still to come. We'll be talking about the Scottish First Minister Holmes and his pledge to freeze Scotland's council tax next year. That's next, as well as the rest of the day's newspapers in just a moment.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamonn.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Let's take a look at your newspaper front pages now. Lots of them featuring an attack at a hospital in Gaza last night. Officials in Palestine say there are at least 500 people killed. Their Palestinian Health Authority. Meanwhile, Israel has blamed Hamas for the misfiring rocket.
The Eye also leads with this story, adding that many who were killed in the attack were children and civilians seeking shelter in the hospital.
Elsewhere, here's the Financial Times front page featuring a picture of President Xi alongside Putin. That was during the Belt and Road Forum being held in Beijing yesterday.
And the Daily Telegraph has warned that we're facing a terror threat from Iran here in Britain. That's according to the head of MI5, Ken McCallum. He said the country already posted a particularly intensive threat and may now move into new directions.
And the Daily Star can always be relied upon to give a completely different take on the day, or indeed the world's news. It's an invasion, but of a different sort. What type are they talking about, Tom?
Well, furry-clawed Chinese crabs, which are apparently marching sideways across the country, eating everything in their path.
So nothing to cheer us up then, but something perhaps to make us smile. Listen, we're going through the papers. We've got the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Mellor, and the political consultant, Emma Burnell, both veterans on this programme with us. And David, I want to start with you. I guess since the papers were published, in fact, overnight, this story's really moved on quite a lot. We've heard from the IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, robustly denying what they've been accused of in relation to the strike on a hospital. What's been your take on what you've heard so far this morning? Because you've been sceptical of their denial previously.
Well, you know, I go back 35 years when, as a minister, I went to Gaza. It's the most awful place on earth, and got myself into a bit of a row with an Israeli colonel because I just couldn't stand the way in which the IDF were treating perfectly harmless civilians. I mean, there are people who are not harmless, awful Islamists who behave very badly and who skulk in Qatar and put themselves at no risk. But most people are in Gaza because they can't be anywhere else. And I just think the anger that everybody feels makes it impossible, I believe, to reach out for a settlement. I mean, it's ironic, you know, that the years after I went to Gaza, I found myself in a situation where I was 20 feet away from 2 IRA mortar bombs. We don't have fighting with the IRA now because people sat down and realized there had to be a path to peace. I mean, I had a meeting with the then Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir, and I said to him, I'm a 35-year-old father of 2 young children in London. If I was a 35-year-old father of 2 young children in Israel, what hope do you offer me that my family will ever grow up in peace? He had no answer.
Well, the same could be said to Hamas, though,
you know?
couldn't it? You know, what hope have any Gazans
They
got?
didn't ask to see me. Look, I despise Hamas. They skulk in Qatar and they exploit as cynically as anyone possibly can do a captive population of Palestinians. So please don't think I'm arguing in favour. But at the end of the day, the Israelis, I believe, can and should have done more to sort out, at least make some effort towards a peace process. Now, they haven't done so.
Now, David Miller, as you've been speaking, we can now see live pictures of Air Force One heading to touchdown in Israel. This is, of course, President Biden's much-awaited visit to the region. And Emma Burnell, what are we expecting Biden to achieve here? Because there have been several meetings, particularly with the Jordanians, the Egyptians and the Palestinian authorities, that have been cancelled over the last 12 hours of confusion.
Yeah, I mean, I think when he took off, hopes were probably higher than when he's landing for any potential, I mean, not diplomatic solutions, that's far too optimistic, but some sort of movement on things like humanitarian aid to Gaza.
Just to confirm, he has now, the President of the United States, touched down in Israel. If you're listening on the radio, this is the breaking news that the President has flown in for one half of the meetings that were planned by the White House, as Emma was just explaining there, half of those being cancelled. Listen, we have to talk about this hospital strike. It's completely changed the President's visit. It's completely changed well, the whole situation, it's very much on a knife edge. The IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, this time an hour ago, coming out and absolutely denying it. And, you know, some commentators saying, why on earth would the Israelis strike a hospital when the President of the United States was flying in? They know what the diplomatic implications of doing that would be. But we need a third party, don't we? Two-source verification of this denial, whether that be from the United Nations, American intelligence, or indeed, as we asked Andrew Griffith this morning, British intelligence as well.
Yeah, I think this is the thing. Both sides on this conflict are going to be playing a PR war as much as they are having an actual war. And we need neutral third parties to sort of say this is the truth, because the first casualty of war is truth. We know that. I think there are really... It's such a complicated and protracted situation. It's been going on my entire lifetime. But, I mean, I think Biden is probably the best person to get involved from the States, because he has just a huge history of foreign policy. The reason he was brought in as Obama's vice president, because Obama was seen as light on foreign policy and Joe Biden had always been involved in that. So I think, you know, he is the best person to go in and try and mediate. But the problem is there's an awful lot of sense from sort of social media and things like that, oh, peace is easy. It's just about singing Imagine and you know, Kumbaya. Peace is really, really hard. Revenge is easy, conflict is easy, anger is easy. Those are the things that we naturally reach towards. Actually going to your enemy and saying, let's sit down and make a deal, that's the hard work.
But Emma, is anyone even talking about peace at this stage? I don't even think President Biden was hoping for peace.
But this peace has to start somewhere, and it starts with operating by the rules of war. It starts by ensuring that the innocents on both sides do not become casualties in this as much as possible.
The chances of peace are slim and none, and slim's left out.
Well, indeed.
But what is terrible is, instead of trying to use an event like this to actually try and calm things down and start a process. As I say, I've been in Gaza. I'll never forget that. It's just awful, abominable. And to then drive half the population of Gaza from one end of the country to the other, it's a 25-mile-long strip.
With 2 million people already living in it.
And 8 miles. And so it's absolutely impossible. And I just don't... There was a time when people unhesitatingly thought that, Israel, poor little Israel, plucky little Israel and the rest of it, although the attack by Hamas was terrible...
Horrendous.
I still think that the Israelis need to show some determination to achieve peace. But as long as Mr. Netanyahu is around, that's not going to happen.
I almost, want to say that the ambitions are much more humble than that, but the word humble's not right. But, peace, to me, seems a long way off. What we need in the short term is the siege to be addressed. We need basic human rights to be met, the right to water, which they can actually pump themselves in Gaza, assuming they have electricity. And we're looking at a live shot of Air Force One on the tarmac, on the runway in Tel Aviv. The President of the United States, leader of the free world, has arrived there in this significantly reduced diplomatic visit to the region. We haven't yet seen him appear there. We expect he will be making his way through some serious meetings today, as well as meeting victims involved in the Hamas atrocities, as well as those first responders, before making an address. We'll be keeping a close eye live here on GB News on that for you.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new t-shirt.
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
We're looking at live pictures of Air Force One, which has just touched down in Tel Aviv. The United States President Joe Biden has landed in Israel, promising to put tough questions to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during his visit. The blame game has begun over an explosion at a hospital in Gaza, which allegedly killed hundreds.
Well, good morning. We are staying on our pictures of Air Force One, but it is 9 o'clock here in the UK on Wednesday, the 18th of October, and this is Breakfast with Isabel Webster and Tom Harwood.
Well, we're expecting Joe Biden to disembark from Air Force One in the next few minutes and indeed bring with him a heavy responsibility in terms of what can be achieved here in Israel over the next 24 hours. Of course, meetings that Joe Biden was going to have with King Abdullah of Jordan, President Sisi of Egypt, and Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, have all been cancelled as things stand after the confusion with regards to that fire and explosion at a hospital in Gaza City overnight.
Yeah, this happened at 6:59 local time, and the Palestinian Health Ministry blamed Israel squarely for it, claiming 500 people had been killed, including medical staff, and seeing medical supplies being destroyed in that as well. The elderly, civilians, women and children all part of that, but the IDF having denied it as well. Here we go. We can see the President of the United States emerging for the first time from Air Force One and descending those steps himself onto the tarmac at the airport in Tel Aviv.
He is greeting the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, embracing Benjamin Netanyahu there on the tarmac of Tel Aviv airport, making some introductory remarks, surrounded by a throng of reporters, dignitaries and indeed the Secret Service as well, making polite conversation and no doubt words of consolation there on the tarmac of Tel Aviv airport, greeting with affection the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu there.
Yeah, and President Biden having a vast career experience of international relations. He'll be all too aware of the importance of recognising the hurt and pain of those Hamas atrocities, whilst also asking those difficult questions surrounding the chaos and confusion in relation to that hospital strike, which could prove a turning point in this Israel-Gaza conflict.
Indeed, it has been reported that this trip, this visit by President Biden was conditional on certain concessions from Israel towards the people of Gaza. Things like humanitarian aid corridors, safe areas for civilians, and indeed potentially a delay to this sweeping ground invasion of Gaza that had been expected. Could Joe Biden be the person to cool down the temperature here in the Middle released over the next 24 hours, or might it all be too late? A lot is riding on this particular extraordinary presidential visit.
Yeah, extraordinary is the word, and security incredibly tight. We're looking at pictures of lots of his special Secret Service there surrounding his vehicle. He will then travel in a motorcade before holding meetings with Benjamin Netanyahu, who we saw greeting him there. And they are both today expected to make joint statements. We know that there are historic tensions between the two leaders. There have been differences of opinion over the years, and they will be seeking to establish common ties. The United States, of course, huge allies to Israel and have pledged their unequivocal support to the Israeli state, but it is not without conditions. The President of the United States will be wanting something in return for this visit. He will be putting pressure on Israel to open some sort of humanitarian corridor, or at least to ease the siege on the Strip, allowing water, electricity and medicine to flow back into the region. But this trip significantly reduced with, as we've been reporting this morning, the second half of those meetings having been cancelled dramatically just before the President left the White House last night on this already announced visit to the Middle East.
Well, let's bring in now our man on the ground. Charlie Peters has been following developments in Israel. He is in Tel Aviv, the same city where, of course, the United States President has just touched down. And Charlie, what can we expect from the President's visit today?
Well, he is going to try and continue that urgent humanitarian shopping list that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, arrived with last week but failed to check out. In particular, the establishment of those humanitarian safe zones in the south of the Gaza Strip after the IDF ordered some 1.1 million people to head from North Gaza to the south ahead of that likely planned ground invasion, and also the increased bombardment from air, sea and land, artillery and airstrikes continuing to hit Hamas military capabilities, the IDF say, in the area. They will also want to secure the flow of humanitarian aid from the Egyptian side into Gaza through that Rafah border crossing, which has remained closed. There have now been 3 occasions in the last 4 days where the Americans have said that they believe the Rafah crossing will open imminently, and those hopes have been dashed as the situation in the south of Gaza increasingly becomes untenable for the people there. They have also, like the Britons, urged people to move into the Rafah crossing area so that if it does open, foreign nationals are able to exit that war zone. And there have been airstrikes in the south as well. The Hamas-run health ministry in the Gaza Strip claiming that 49 people were killed in an airstrike in Yunus Khan 2 days ago. But this visit comes also at an urgent time for Israel as it attempts to convince the world of its side of what happened last night in the north with that explosion at a hospital, the Baptist Christian Hospital in Gaza City. This morning, the IDF has released what it says is compelling signals and imagery intelligence of the situation last night. They also say that some 450 rockets have failed to clear the Gaza Strip after they've been launched by the Hamas terror group and other associated groups inside the Gaza Strip. So they're trying to paint a picture of pattern analysis leading to this crisis last night. And they've also shown us in the imagery intelligence that they've released this morning the differences between the craters that you'd usually anticipate with an IDF strike, such as the 1,000-pound bombs or the JDAM missiles used by the IDF and allies in the region, and what remains of that car park next to the hospital this morning where there was a significant blast. There are also some other claims in Tel Aviv this morning from analysts and observers who say that munitions could have been stored at the hospital, as is within the tactics and procedures of Hamas. And that conversation continuing there as they seek to understand that situation as regional partners, particularly on the Arab side, seek to push away from the Israelis and the Americans at this urgent turning point in the diplomatic relations.
And Charlie, stay with us. I just want to bring our viewers is with us as well as that motorcade gets underway. The reason perhaps for some of that delay once the President of the United States got into the vehicle is to do with the fact that yesterday the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's plane had to be evacuated at Israel's Ben Gurion airport, and that was due to rocket attacks. Those flying with the Chancellor were able to board the plane a few minutes later, as well as the Chancellor, but security incredibly tight. Nobody can afford for this to go wrong. We see the trouble and the chaos that has been caused, not only, of course, to human life and civilians with this hospital strike, but also in terms of the optics and the actual physical safety of international leaders.
Indeed, and we're seeing a seemingly endless stream of cars there, not just the President of the United States, but many of his advisors, security services and others accompanying him on this trip today. Charlie, I suppose the #1 topic of conversation and concern will be what really happened overnight at this hospital in Gaza. The IDF this morning saying that it has been the Palestinian Authorities trying to hide what really happened, that Hamas is really behind this perhaps malfunction that led to the dramatic scenes we saw at that hospital. Might we be hearing words from the United States on this today?
This is, I think, what the Israeli side is urgently keen to see. They want third-party support for their intelligence claims this morning, of course. Both sides making claims about the situation, those in the Gaza Strip and those in Tel Aviv urgently putting forward their side of the story. But this morning, the evidence provided by Hamas has been limited, whereas the IDF has put forward compelling but by no means conclusive evidence about what they say was a misfired rocket by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group. They've shown footage of the launch from the Gaza Strip. We were in Tel Aviv walking around reporting when that barrage of rockets was fired towards us. And as you said, the German Chancellor taking shelter at that same time. It was a significant barrage. And the IDF said this morning that some 450 rockets have landed short, some of them within the Gaza Strip, since the start of this war. On the first day, they fired 4,500 rockets into Israel. So there have been significant efforts to launch rockets into this country, and not all of them work. They are a non-state hostile actor. Their tactics and procedures are not to the same level of a conventional military, and we do know that they use homemade explosive devices, and there are also claims made by the Israelis that they use water pipes to develop their rockets and the launch systems that they use. So the opportunity for failure, for launch failure, for misfire, and also for rockets to break up in the air is relatively high when compared with conventional militaries in the region. But yes, there is now urgent conversation about the idea that the American side might come in and offer their own intelligence analysis of what happened last night as the IDF continues to release more information. They're very clearly trying everything they can to fight the narrative that was launched last night within moments of this appalling incident. Within just 15 minutes, the Palestinian Authority announced 3 days of mourning for what it described as a crime of genocide. Lebanon, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, all of the Arab nations coming out within the first hour to condemn Israel for what had happened before, the Israelis say, information was released sufficiently. It took them 2 hours to respond to our press requests, and many other journalists obviously here urgently reaching out to the IDF last night, where they said that they did not do it. And then this morning, the more compelling intelligence evidence has been put forward. Compelling, but as we say, not conclusive. So the Israeli hope today will be that further insight, not just from the US, but hopefully they hope from other Western powers observing the situation. We do have British spy planes, let's not forget, flying over this coast, observing the situation. Those maritime patrol aircraft deployed by Rishi Sunak a week ago, they have been seen, well, not seen, we know that they are above this coastline, observing the Gaza Strip. So there is significant imagery and signals intelligence being gathered in the Gaza Strip, and there are now hopes, of course, that more information will come out to establish once and for all what happened at that hospital last night. There are also questions about the death toll. The Hamas-run health ministry saying it's well over 500, but of course no official confirmation on that yet, though the scene does look devastating.
And Charlie, stay with us again. I just want to explain some of the pictures that we're showing on our screen to the audience and describe them for those listening on the radio. But this is where the President is heading next. And, of course, security incredibly tight. You'll have seen that snake of vehicles following him from the airport in Tel Aviv. The presidential motorcade, famously often 40 or 50 vehicles. All of these will be highly secure, armoured vehicles, and indeed there was an ambulance as well. Often the motorcade will also be carrying the blood of the President of the United States as well, and lots of armed response should the worst happen. And I suppose just reflecting on what happened with Olaf Scholz yesterday at the airport, every precaution has to be taken. And just running through the agenda of what he is expected to do today, in spite of the cancellations of his meetings later on, the second half of it, he is expected to meet the full war cabinet in Israel, as well as having a private session with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And after that, he is expected to meet first responders, some of the families of those loved ones who are believed to have lost or have people held hostage in Gaza. He'll make public remarks a little bit later on, and will then have a short meeting with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. No face-to-face meetings anymore with Abbas, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, or indeed King Abdullah, but it is thought that there will still be communication, if not direct, there. And look, we're getting those live pictures now, the beginning of that motorcade coming in through the streets of Tel Aviv.
And, of course, the President riding in the famous car, the Beast, which famously got stuck in the Downing Street turning circle several years ago, but it is hermetically sealed against chemical attacks. It does carry the President's blood type and, of course, features bulletproof windows as well. A specially modified, incredibly secure car that the President uses not just for domestic travel, but international travel as well. We can now revisit some images of the President of the United States getting off the plane, which happened just some moments ago. Around 15 minutes ago, Joe Biden disembarking from Air Force One, which has touched down in the last half hour there in Tel Aviv, greeting the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, there on the airport grounds, and other dignitaries as well, surrounded by a throng of press, cameras, and, of course, Secret Service security. Security, of course, being incredibly tight throughout this visit. But yes, just to update you on the news there, President Biden, having touched down in Israel, greeted the Prime Minister of Israel, and now well on his way to further meetings, which we'll have throughout the morning.
We'll go back to those live pictures now. The motorcade having just travelled through the streets of Tel Aviv on their way to the destination for their first behind closed doors meetings between the two men we just saw pictured there, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden. This is, to be perfectly honest, an extraordinary war visit from the President of the United States. Unfortunately, it is not the visit that he had announced, having had half of those meetings cancelled in light of what happened last night. And as we've been reflecting all morning, really, it is a race now to try and establish the facts around what happened to Gaza Hospital, the hospital in Gaza City, at around 7 o'clock.
This is, of course, the second active war zone that the President of the United States has visited during his time in office. No doubt this will have profound domestic implications as well as international ones. Our man on the ground, Charlie Peters, is still here with us in Tel Aviv. And Charlie, what can we expect to actually be achieved today in concrete terms?
Well, one thing that the American side will want to avoid is seeing President Joe Biden rushing into a shelter. Of course, we've seen so much footage over the last week of world leaders and foreign secretaries coming under rocket attack. And I think that's something they're going to try and limit, and to keep Joe Biden inside the Beast car convoy, but also indoors as much as possible in buildings with shelters, that he is not caught in the open, to minimise that risk. But in terms of the opportunities available to American diplomacy, they have certainly shortened since last night. In the last 12 hours, so much on the ground has changed. with the Arab solidarity certainly hardening since that explosion at the hospital. That crucial meeting in the eyes of the Americans with King Abdullah of Jordan and the Egyptians to help develop the humanitarian situation in the south being scrapped will have a devastating impact on the influence of American diplomacy. I think also the Americans are hoping to establish a further understanding of what the Israeli plan is in North Gaza, where they have asked all those citizens to flee south, hundreds of thousands of them likely remaining in North Gaza ahead of what could be an appallingly brutal, slow and deliberate invasion by IDF troops, which could see hand-to-hand, door-to-door, underground fighting. Some of the most brutal urban fighting you can anticipate in the entire world will happen in the Gaza Strip if that invasion goes ahead. And there'll be conversations to try and support the Israelis from the American side about how they can defeat Hamas military capabilities while also limiting that devastation in the Gaza Strip, which is having a significant impact on their diplomatic relations with Arab partners in the region, particularly Jordan. Jordan has described this blockade in the Gaza as a war crime, saying the same to Rishi Sunak when he visited Downing Street on Sunday, really reaffirming deep concerns there about the situation in the Gaza Strip, the blocking off of electricity and water supplies in the south of particular concern, because of course the Americans are hoping that the Israelis can move as many civilians south as possible ahead of further bombardment and that likely ground invasion to clear out Hamas military capabilities. But if the Arab side, particularly Jordan and Egypt, have been pushed away by that reports of those strikes on the hospital last night, then that is going to make that mission so much more difficult. And there will be deep frustration within the American side today and the Israelis that all of those nations typically aligned with the Palestinian cause have so quickly adopted the line pushed out by the Hamas-run health ministry and the Palestinian authorities in the West Bank as well, that this was an Israeli airstrike, as more and more compelling but not conclusive evidence suggests that it was instead a misfired or failing rocket by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That failed rocket, just one rocket, could have had devastating implications for the humanitarian diplomacy that's so to take place over the coming days. It's sensed here in Tel Aviv as though the situation with the Israelis was calming. Yesterday we heard from Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht, an IDF spokesman, who said that other options were on the table, that everyone is talking about a ground invasion, they may do something else. And now those links between the Israelis and the Americans and the Egyptians and the Jordanians, crucially, have simmered. They have frozen somewhat. They have been drifting apart since that explosion last night. And it seems as though both sides are talking not only from different scripts, but from different understandings of what happened last night. So if they can establish, the Israelis, military support from the Americans in terms of intelligence on what happened on the ground, that will be crucial. But as it stands, the Israelis still trying to convince the world that what happened last night was a failure by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, not by Israeli air forces.
Yeah, I think compelling, not conclusive, is the phrase, Charlie. And, you know, we were hearing suggestions that Prime Minister Sunak might be following in the president's footsteps and travelling to Israel. And indeed, his hopes, I think, were to the region tomorrow. That's in question now in light of all of this confusion around the hospital strike. But if the facts can be established, and I'm sure that Israel will be at pains to try and persuade President Biden that they weren't involved today, if they are able to do that, things could change quite dramatically. It's not to say that, in fact, some of those talks could be reopened. And it certainly seems from Israel's point of view, whilst the president will want to have strong words with them in relation to following international law, the Israelis may also be under pressure to prove conclusively that this was not their work in Gaza.
Yes, but at the same time, I think the Arab side from the nations here, Jordan in particular, but also the UAE, Lebanon, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, once they have established that line so strongly last night, it is unlikely to shift, I think, much, even if the evidence being produced by the Israelis and possibly with American intelligence support, even if that evidence becomes more compelling, but not conclusive, then I think even still it's highly likely that those Arab powers in the region will stand by their statements last night, because I think it's likely they see this as an opportunity to stop the invasion. They see this as an opportunity to pour more international condemnation on the situation on the ground to prevent Israel from moving in from that likely invasion. If they can win the hearts and minds of the world in the understanding that Israeli actions are brutal, they are indiscriminate, and they destroy civilian hospitals, schools, and indeed livelihoods, then they will be able, they hope, to reduce the likelihood of that likely ground invasion. So I think even if the Western intelligence support comes in today to reaffirm and buttress some of those claims made by the Israeli side this morning, we saw that intelligence from imagery analysts and also very rare signals intelligence, with the IDF claiming a conversation between two Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip describing the failed airstrike from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. With that information released, they will be hoping that the Americans can come in and support it. But yeah, as I said, regardless of what the Americans and the Israelis say today, regardless of the evidence they produce, I think the Arab side see this as an opportunity to prevent that Israeli ground invasion. And Joe Biden is caught between two very dramatic sides here. And what he says could be influential, of course, but also likely will not have the effect that the Americans are hoping to achieve, both in terms of the humanitarian shopping list they have in the south, humanitarian safe zones, aid crossing in from the Egyptian side, but also to try and get to the bottom of what happened last night in the Christian hospital in Gaza City.
The age-old phrase is that a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth has got its boots on. But one of the lines from the IDF earlier this morning was that it's impossible to know what happened at that hospital as quickly as Hamas claimed. Within an hour of the incident, you had so many lines from Hamas, from various others within the region claiming they knew exactly what happened. Does it add credence to the Israeli Defense Forces and their assessment that they took the best part of 12 hours to come up with their explanation to present their own evidence?
Yes, but it took 2 hours for the first line to come out from the IDF last night after the reported explosion on the hospital, and the Hamas line came out almost instantly after that explosion took place. Within 15 minutes, the Palestinian authorities in the West Bank had described it as a crime of genocide. And then we also saw the Iranians come out and call on people to march to Israeli embassies. We saw protests outside of British embassies last night and American embassies across the region. In Lebanon, there were blockades towards the Beirut embassies there as people marched to protest. Fires lit outside of the Israeli embassy in Oman, in Jordan as well. So very tense situation, inflamed suddenly within the hour of the reported hospital explosion. In the West Bank, of course, we have seen those tensions flaring over the last week. Without many people noticing, this has been the deadliest week on record in the West Bank, as so much attention is drawn to the Gaza Strip. And of course, let's not forget the north of Israel, where skirmishes with Lebanese Hezbollah continue. The West Bank has seen over 61 deaths of Palestinians since this conflict started. Yesterday, a 17-year-old and 71-year-old killed by Israeli forces. So concerns are growing now that this situation last night, as you say, Tom, this view that the Israelis are responsible for the attack will grow inside the Arab world, and more protests and more violence and more escalation will continue.
OK, Charlie Peters in Tel Aviv for now. Thank you very much indeed, as we reflect on the breaking news that in the last half an hour, the President of the United States has arrived on an extraordinary visit to Israel, when there are big questions about where this conflict goes next. That's it from me and from Tom for this morning. Up next, it's Britain's Newsroom. Thank you.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diverse